The late 1870s sun did not shine upon the Arizona territory so much as it hammered it into submission. It was a brutal, white-hot weight that pressed down on the spine of the world, bleaching the color from the scrub oak and turning the jagged hills in the distance into shimmering mirages of heat and dust. There was no mercy in this land. Only a vast, indifferent silence broken occasionally by the scream of a red-tailed hawk or the distant, menacing smudge of smoke from the army forts that dotted the horizon like sores. Tala walked because stopping meant dying. Her moccasins were worn nearly through to the soles, leaving her to feel every sharp stone and burr hidden in the dust. She was a shadow of the woman she had been 3 years ago. Her cheekbones pressed sharp against skin that was darkened by the sun and roughened by wind. And her black hair, once thick and glossy, was dull with dust and tied back with a fraying strip of leather. Behind her trailed the only 2 reasons she had not laid down in the sagebrush and let the coyotes take her. Nika, her daughter of 5 winters, stumbled along, holding the hem of Tala's ragged skirt. The girl's eyes were too big for her face, dark pools of exhaustion set in a gaunt frame. Behind Nika walked Tomas. He was 10, perhaps 11. Tala had lost track of the exact months in the blur of survival, and he tried to walk with the stride of a warrior, though his legs were stick-thin and his lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration. They had been walking for 3 days since slipping away from the reservation boundaries. 3 days of dodging patrols. 3 days of eating nothing but mesquite beans and chewing on prickly pear pads to suck the moisture from the pulp. Tala stopped, raising a hand to shield her eyes. The wind kicked up, carrying the taste of alkali and dry earth. She scanned the horizon, her vision blurring slightly at the edges. "Mama?" Nika whispered. Her voice was a dry rustle, like dead leaves rubbing together. "I cannot walk more." "You must," Tala said, though her own throat felt as if she had swallowed a handful of sand. "We are close. I smell water." It was a lie, or perhaps a prayer. But a mile later, the prayer was answered. The ranch appeared out of the heat haze like a hallucination. It sat in a shallow depression between 2 low ridges, an island of stubborn human will in a sea of wilderness. There was a house made of weathered timber that had been scoured gray by the sandstorms. A large barn leaned slightly to the west, as if tired of holding up the sky. Beside it, a windmill creaked with a rhythmic, metallic groan, its blade spinning lazily in the hot breeze, pumping life into a round wooden tank that stood half full. Water. Tala felt the instinct to run toward it, to plunge her face into that tank. But the hard lessons of the last few years froze her feet. Water meant men. Men meant guns. And guns meant death for the Apache, especially those found wandering off the government lands where they were meant to rot. She signaled for the children to lower themselves. They crouched behind a cluster of boulders and mesquite bushes, blending into the brown and gray landscape. Tala lay on her stomach, the heat of the rock seeping into her chest, and watched. The ranch was isolated, foolishly so. There were no other homesteads for miles, no bunkhouse for hired hands. A small herd of cattle, perhaps 40 head, grazed on the poor, yellowed grass that grew near the water tank. They were lean, hardy beasts, their ribs showing through their dusty hides. Then she saw him. A man rode along the fence line a quarter of a mile away. He sat on a large bay horse that looked as trail-worn as the cattle. Tala narrowed her eyes, studying him as a wolf studies a wounded elk. He was a white man, tall, wearing a faded hat pulled low. Even from this distance, she could see the slump in his shoulders. He did not ride with the arrogance of the soldiers or the eager energy of the new settlers who came looking for gold. He rode like a man carrying a heavy stone on his back. He dismounted to check a loose fence post. When he hit the ground, his left leg buckled slightly. A limp. He was injured, or old, or both. He took off his hat to wipe his forehead with a sleeve, revealing hair that was brown but streaked with premature gray. His face was a map of lines and sunburn, his expression one of weary vigilance. He looked at the sky, checking the gathering clouds in the north, then checked the horizon. He was alone. This is the place, Tala thought. The desperation in her belly twisted like a knot of vipers. She crawled backward until they were safely in the deep cut of a dry arroyo that snaked behind the ridge. The walls of the wash were high enough to hide them. "Listen to me," she whispered to Thomas, gripping his thin shoulders. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from the weakness of hunger. "You stay here. You keep Nika quiet. Do not move. Do not show your heads." "I go with you," Thomas said, his jaws setting in a stubborn line that reminded her so much of his father it made her chest ache. "No," Tala hissed. "He has a dog. I heard it barking. If things go wrong, if I do not come back, you take your sister and you run south. You run until you find the mountains." "Mama," Nika whimpered, reaching for her. Tala pulled away, hardening her heart because she had to. "I will bring food, I promise." She left them huddled in the shade of the cut bank, two small, dusty ghosts, and began her approach. She moved differently now. She was no longer a weary mother dragging her children. She was a hunter. She stayed low, moving through the brittle grass with a silence that had been bred into her people for generations. Every step was calculated. She placed her feet where the ground was solid, avoiding the crunch of dry twigs. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat that threatened to drown out the wind. Memories she tried to keep chained in the dark of her mind began to rattle their cages. She remembered the noise of the soldiers, the shouts, the heavy-caliber thrum of the Springfield rifles. The night her husband had died, the air had been thick with smoke and the screams of horses. She squeezed her eyes shut for a second, forcing the image of the burning lodges away. Not now, not today. She reached the back of the corral. The horses inside, a roan mare and a mule, snorted and shifted, smelling her scent, but they did not call out. Tala slipped between the rails of the fence and pressed herself against the rough wood of the barn. The man, the rancher, had ridden back to the house. She had seen him go inside, the heavy door thudding shut behind him. Smoke was curling from the stovepipe. He would be making coffee, or perhaps eating. The thought of food made saliva flood her mouth, painful and sharp. She circled to the side door of the barn. It hung slightly ajar on a leather hinge. She slipped inside. The smell hit her instantly. A rich, earthy perfume of dry alfalfa, cured leather, horse sweat, and grain. To a starving woman, it smelled like heaven. It was cool inside. Shadows draping the corners where the sunlight coming through the cracks in the walls did not reach. She moved quickly, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. There, hanging from a heavy oak beam to keep it away from the rats, was a canvas sack. She touched it, feeling the kernels of corn and oats through the fabric. Horse feed, but it was food. Beside it hung a side of smoked venison, wrapped in cheesecloth, curing in the dry air. Tala pulled a worn, gray blanket from her shoulder. It was threadbare and stained, but it was strong enough. She used her knife to slash the bottom of the grain sack, catching the golden spill in the blanket. She worked with frantic haste, her hands trembling. She cut a large chunk of the smoked meat, the smell of hickory and salt making her dizzy. She was stuffing the meat into the bundle when the sound of a latch clicking froze the blood in her veins. It was not the wind. It was the distinct, metallic clack of a shotgun breaking open and snapping shut. Tala spun around. The blanket clutched to her chest. The barn door she had entered was blocked. The man stood there. Caleb Hart filled the doorway, the bright afternoon light silhouetting his frame, making him look like a giant. At his side, a large, ragged dog with a scarred ear growled low in its throat, a sound like grinding stones. But Tala did not look at the dog. She looked at the twin barrels of the 12-gauge shotgun leveled at her chest. For a heartbeat, neither of them breathed. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that cut between them, swirling in the silence. Caleb stared at the figure before him. He had heard the horses shift restlessly from the house, a sound that didn't sit right in the rhythm of the ranch. He had expected a coyote, or perhaps a drifter looking to steal a saddle. He had not expected a woman. She was small, frail-looking, her clothes hanging on her frame like rags on a scarecrow. But her eyes were not frail, they were black, hard, and burning with a terrified ferocity. She looked like a cornered mountain cat. "Drop it," Caleb said. His voice was rough, unused to speaking to anyone but his animals. Tala's hand dropped instinctively to the knife hidden at her waist. Her fingers brushed the handle. She could throw it. She was fast, but the man was 20 feet away, and the shotgun would tear her in half before she could lift her arm. She saw his eyes track the movement of her hand. His finger tightened on the trigger. He did not look like a man who hesitated to kill. He looked like a man who had seen enough death that one more would not ruin his sleep. But then his gaze shifted. He looked at the blanket in her arms. He saw the corn spilling out onto the dirt floor. He saw the slab of smoked meat. "You are stealing from me," Caleb said, stepping fully into the barn. The dog paced forward, hackles raised. Tala did not drop the food. She clutched it tighter, pressing it against her ribs as if it were part of her body. "My kids," she rasped. The words came out strangled, her English thick and broken. She hated speaking this tongue, the language of the men who had drawn lines on maps and told her people where they could and could not live. But she had no choice. "My kids are hungry," she said again, louder this time. She lifted her chin, refusing to look at the floor. She would not beg. She would state the truth, and if he killed her, he would have to do it while looking into her eyes. Caleb paused. The anger that had flared when he found an intruder began to curdle into something else. "Kids." The word struck him with the force of a physical blow. A memory, sharp and jagged as broken glass, sliced through his mind. A small wooden bed in the corner of the ranch house. A fever that would not break. The sound of a small, hacking cough that went on for nights until suddenly, terribly, it stopped. He looked at the Apache woman, but he saw the fresh mound of earth on the hill behind the house, the small cross he had carved from cedar. He shook his head, trying to clear the ghost. He gripped the shotgun tighter, relying on the cold steel to ground him. "Out," he commanded, gesturing with the barrel toward the open yard. "Move." He did not trust her. He had fought the Apache in the campaigns down along the border. He knew their tactics. A woman pleading for food could be a distraction while the men circled behind to slit his throat and take his horses. Tala hesitated, but the dog lunged forward with a snap of its jaws, stopping only when Caleb gave a sharp whistle. She stepped back, then walked slowly toward the sunlight, clutching the blanket. "Drop the food," Caleb barked. "No," Tala said. It was a foolish defiance, but she could not let go. If she let go, Thomas and Nika died. It was that simple. Caleb cursed under his breath. He followed her out into the blinding afternoon glare, the wind immediately whipping at his coat and her long, tattered skirt. He scanned the ridges, his eyes darting to the rocks, the brush, the windmill tower. "Where are they?" he demanded. "Where are the rest of you?" Tala said nothing. She walked toward the center of the yard, her mind racing. She had to get away. She had to lead him away from the arroyo. But fear has a smell, and children have an instinct for their mother's terror. "Mama!" The cry came from the left, from the direction of the dry wash. Tala spun around, horror flooding her veins like ice water. "No, stay back!" she screamed in her own language, dropping the blanket. But it was too late. Thomas came scrambling up the bank of the arroyo, pulling Nika with him. They ran across the hard-packed earth of the yard, their bare feet kicking up puffs of dust. They did not run away. They ran toward her. Caleb pivoted, swinging the shotgun toward the new movement. His heart leaped into his throat. "Ambush!" He leveled the weapon, his finger taking up the slack on the trigger. Then he saw them. They were not warriors. They were scarecrows. A boy, his ribs visible through a torn shirt that was 3 sizes too big. A girl, tiny and stumbling, her face streaked with dirt and tears. Caleb froze. The image of the enemy he had held in his mind, the painted warriors, the deadly raiders, shattered against the reality of these 2 starving children. They reached the woman, burying their faces in her skirts. The little girl was sobbing, a high, thin sound that was torn away by the wind. But the boy let go of his mother and turned to face Caleb. Thomas stood in front of Tala, spreading his thin arms as if to shield her. He glared at the rancher, his dark eyes wide with terror but burning with a fierce, trembling courage. He barely came up to Caleb's waist, yet he stood his ground against the shotgun and the growling dog. Caleb looked at the boy's face, and the gun barrel wavered. It dipped an inch, then another. The silence in the yard was heavy, broken only by the creak of the windmill and the girls weeping. Caleb felt a strange hollowness open up in his chest. He looked at the woman. She had her hands on the boy's shoulders, pulling him back, trying to cover both children with her body. She looked at Caleb not with hatred, but with a pleading desperation that cut through his solitude. "Alone?" Caleb asked. His voice was quieter now, though still rough with suspicion. "Just you?" Tala nodded slowly, her chest heaving. "Just us. Where's your band?" Caleb asked. He kept the gun lowered but ready. This could still be a trap. "No band," Tala said, struggling with the words. "We leave. We run from San Carlos, the reservation." Caleb knew the place. Hell on earth, people called it. A patch of barren rock and sand where the government herded the tribes to turn them into farmers on land that couldn't grow weeds. "Why?" Caleb asked. Tala swallowed hard. She looked down at Nika, who was clinging to her leg, and then back at the white man. "No food. Agent Steele rations. Sickness comes. Everyone coughing." She mimicked the sound of a deep chest cough, and Caleb flinched as if she had struck him. "My husband dead," Tala continued, her voice gaining a hard edge. "I not let them die. We walk." Caleb looked at them, really looked at them. He saw the cracked lips, the sunken eyes, the way the boy's legs trembled from the effort of standing. They were not a war party. They were refugees of a war that was supposed to be over. The wind gusted again, rattling the loose boards of the porch roof. High above, 3 crows circled, calling out to one another. "Caw, caw, caw," warning, or perhaps mocking. Caleb glanced back at his house. It was empty, silent. It had been silent for 2 years, since the fever took Mary and the baby. He had come out here to be alone, to work himself into the ground until he was too tired to remember. He didn't want trouble. Helping a runaway Apache was a crime. If the sheriff in town found out, Caleb could lose everything. If the neighbors found out, well, folks around here didn't take kindly to Indians off the reservation. "I ought to take you in," Caleb said. He looked at the horizon, toward the town that was a day's ride away. Sheriff would pay a bounty, maybe send you back. Tala stiffened. She pulled the children tighter. "Send back is death," she said simply. Caleb looked at her. He knew she was right. He had heard the stories. He looked at the boy, Thomas, who was still watching him with that defiant, protective glare. Caleb remembered being a boy, remembered standing in front of his own mother when a drunken stepfather came home swinging. A loud, rumbling growl broke the tension. It wasn't the dog. It was Nika's stomach. The sound was audible even over the wind, a desperate, undeniable protest of an empty belly. The little girl clamped her hands over her middle, looking ashamed. Caleb felt the fight drain out of him. He looked at the shotgun in his hands, suddenly feeling the weight of it, the ugliness of pointing it at a child who was starving. He thumbed the lever, breaking the breech, and the gun fell open. Harmless. He let out a long breath, rubbing the back of his neck with his free hand. He was going to regret this. He knew it in his bones. "You can't stay here," he said gruffly. Tala's shoulders sagged, defeat darkening her eyes. "But," Caleb continued, raising his voice, "I ain't gonna send hungry kids out into a storm." He gestured toward the house with his chin. "Come inside. I got beans and biscuits." Tala didn't move. She stared at him, unable to process the sudden shift. "I said, come inside," Caleb snapped, his patience fraying under the strain of his own conflicting emotions. "Before I change my mind. But you listen to me. You do exactly what I say. You don't touch nothing I don't tell you to touch. You don't go near my rifle. And you don't step foot out that door unless I say so. Understand?" Tala nodded slowly. "Yes, Come on. Then he whistled for the dog, which fell in beside him, and turned to walk back to the house. He could feel their eyes on his back. It was a dangerous thing, turning his back, but he did it anyway. Tala watched him go. She looked at the blanket of spilled corn and meat on the ground. "Leave it," she whispered to Thomas. She took Nika's hand and followed the rancher. The children stared at the house as they approached. To them, it must have looked like a fortress, a wooden mountain rising from the dust. They had never been this close to a white man's dwelling without soldiers chasing them. Caleb held the door open. Tala hesitated at the threshold. The warmth and the smell of coffee drifting out. It smelled like safety, and it smelled like a trap. She ushered the children in first, keeping a hand on Nika's head. The inside of the house was dim and cluttered, but clean in a sparse, masculine way. There was a heavy wooden table, 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove that radiated heat, and shelves lined with tins. A rifle hung over the mantel of the fireplace. Tala noted its position instantly. "Sit," Caleb ordered, pointing to the rough table. They sat. The chairs were too big for the children. Thomas sat on the edge, his feet dangling, his eyes darting around the room, cataloging every exit. Caleb went to the stove. He ladled beans from a pot into 3 tin plates. He added 2 hard biscuits to each plate and poured water from a pitcher into 3 cups. He moved with a heavy, efficient grace, the limp more pronounced now that he was walking on the wooden floor. He set the food down in front of them. Eat. Tala did not eat. She pushed her plate toward the center, dividing her portion onto the children's plates. "Eat," she whispered to them in Apache. "Slowly. Do not get sick." The children did not listen to the warning about speed. They attacked the food with shaking hands, shoveling beans into their mouths, breaking the biscuits and dipping them in the water to soften them. The sound of their eating was the only noise in the room. Caleb leaned against the kitchen counter, his arms crossed, watching them. His jaw was clenched so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. He watched the woman, Tala, she had said her name was, deny herself food to feed the boy and girl. He watched the way she scanned the room, her eyes lingering on the windows, on him. He felt a heavy stone of guilt settle in his gut. He had almost shot them. He had almost shot a mother and her children for a sack of horse feed. "What have I become?" he thought. The solitude had turned him hard, had worn away the softer parts of his humanity until he was as jagged and dry as the hills. He turned back to the stove, filled a 4th plate, and slammed it down on the table in front of Tala. "Eat," he said again. "I got plenty." Tala looked up at him. She saw the hardness in his face, but she also saw the conflict in his eyes. He was a wounded animal, just like them. She took a bite. The beans were salty and hot. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. They ate in silence until the plates were licked clean. The wind outside began to howl, picking up grit and throwing it against the siding of the house like handfuls of gravel. The light in the windows was turning the bruised purple of twilight. Caleb cleared the plates. The domesticity of the action felt strange, alien. He hadn't cooked for more than one person in years. "Night is coming," Caleb said, staring out the window at the darkening land. Tala pulled Nika onto her lap. The girl's eyes were drooping, her belly finally full. Thomas was fighting sleep, sitting upright, watching Caleb. "We go to barn?" Tala asked. Her voice was quiet, resigned. Caleb looked at the children. They were exhausted. If he sent them to the barn, they would freeze. The desert night sucked the heat out of the ground the moment the sun vanished. The kids... Caleb gestured to a small door off the kitchen. There was a narrow bunk room there, used for storage now, but there was a mattress. "Kids sleep in there. It's warm." Tala stiffened. "I stay with them." "No," Caleb said. His voice was hard again. "I don't know you. I ain't having a stranger in my house while I sleep." Not with a knife in her belt. Tala's hand went to her waist. He had seen it. "Kids in the bunk room," Caleb repeated. "You sleep in the barn. I got plenty of hay. It's out of the wind, but you want them warm, or you want them with you in the cold?" Caleb challenged. Tala looked at Nika, who was already asleep against her chest. She looked at the small room Caleb was pointing to. It had a door. It was inside the thick walls. "You lock them?" she asked. "No lock on that door," Caleb said, "but I locked the front door, and I locked the back." He leaned in slightly. "I ain't gonna hurt him. I give you my word." Tala searched his face. The word of a white man meant nothing. But this man, he had lowered the gun. He had fed them. He had eyes that held the same ghost sickness she felt in her own heart. "Okay," she whispered. She carried Nika into the small room and laid her on the mattress. Thomas followed, looking back at his mother with panic. "Sleep, warrior," she told him in their tongue. "Watch over your sister. I am close. I am just outside." She kissed their foreheads, smelling the dust and the scent of the rancher's beans on their breath. She stepped out, closing the door softly. Caleb was waiting by the back door, holding a lantern. He handed it to her, along with 2 heavy wool blankets. "Barn," he said. Tala took the lantern and the blankets. "Thank you," she said. It cost her to say it, but the debt was real. "Don't thank me yet," Caleb muttered, opening the door to the swirling dusk. "Come morning, I gotta decide what to do with you, whether to turn you in or—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't know the end of it yet, or send you away. He finished lamely. Tala stepped out into the cold wind. She looked back at him once, her dark eyes unreadable in the lantern light, then turned and walked toward the dark shape of the barn. Caleb watched her go. He bolted the door. He stood in the silence of his kitchen, listening to the wind and the faint, rhythmic breathing of the children in the next room. He felt the solitude of the ranch shattering around him, and for the first time in a long time, he was afraid of what the morning would bring. Dawn broke over the territory like a cracked bone, sharp and jagged with cold. The sun had not yet crested the eastern ridges, but a pale, bruised light seeped across the horizon, turning the frost on the sparse grass into a carpet of silver needles. The air was thin and brittle, the kind of cold that settled deep in the lungs and made the leather of a saddle stiff as wood. Caleb Hart sat on the edge of his bed, his breath steaming in the quiet room. He rubbed his face with calloused hands, listening to the silence of the house. It was a different kind of silence this morning. Usually, it was the heavy, suffocating quiet of a tomb. But today there was a faint, almost imperceptible rhythm to it, the soft shifting of bodies in the small bunk room off the kitchen. He stood up, his bad leg protesting with a dull ache that shot up his hip. He pulled on his boots, the leather creaking, and walked into the kitchen. The stove had burned down to embers during the night, and the room held a chill that bit at exposed skin. He added wood, coaxing the fire back to life, the cast iron ticking as it expanded. He drank his coffee black and scalding, standing by the window. He was still undecided. The rational part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive through the wars and the lonely years since, told him to saddle the gelding, ride into town, and tell the sheriff he had found strays. It was the law. It was the safe thing to do. But then his eyes drifted to the closed door of the bunk room. He remembered the boy standing in front of his mother, fierce as a badger, and the girl's hollow belly rumbling. Caleb set the cup down with a sharp clatter and grabbed his hat. He would ride the perimeter first. He needed the cold air to clear his head. When he stepped out onto the porch, the dog rose from its spot by the door, stretching and shaking the frost from its coat. Caleb looked toward the barn, expecting to have to rouse the woman out of the hay, but movement by the windmill caught his eye. She was already awake. Tala was standing by the water tank. She had found 2 rusted buckets that Caleb hadn't used in years and was hauling water. She moved with a grim determination, dipping a bucket into the tank, heaving it up, and carrying it toward the horse trough. Her hands were wet, and in this freezing air, the water must have felt like liquid fire. Caleb walked across the yard, his boots crunching on the frozen earth. Nika, the little girl, was watching from the kitchen window, her nose pressed against the glass, her eyes wide and dark. Tala saw him coming. She did not stop. She poured the water into the trough, the splash breaking the thin layer of ice that had formed overnight. She turned to go back to the tank, her breath coming in short, white puffs. Her hands were raw, the skin red and chapped, looking as if it might split open at the knuckles. "You don't have to do that," Caleb said, his voice carrying in the still air. Tala paused, gripping the handle of the bucket. "I pay," she said. She did not look at him. She looked at the task. She was trying to balance the scales. Food for work. It was the only currency she had left. Caleb watched her dip the bucket again. She was shivering, her thin shawl offering little protection against the morning bite. She was stubborn. He respected stubbornness. It was the only thing that survived out here. "Put the bucket down," Caleb said. Tala hesitated, then lowered the bucket to the ground. She looked at him then. Her chin lifted. "I not beg, I work." Caleb looked at her hands, then at the house where the children were waiting. He looked at the vast, empty land around them. The smoke from the distant army fort, just a gray smudge against the purple sky. If he sent them away now, without food, without shoes, they would be dead in a week. Or worse, the soldiers would find them. "If you want to stay," Caleb said slowly, measuring his words, "you will have to work hard. This ain't a charity ward. It is a working ranch." Tala nodded once. "Sharp and quick. I know work. I ain't decided yet," Caleb warned, holding up a finger. "I ain't promising nothing past today, but if you want to eat tonight, you earn it." "I earn it," Tala said. Caleb nodded. "All right then. Finish the trough, then come to the barn." He walked away, feeling the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. He had just bought himself more trouble than he knew how to handle. But as he walked, the image of the woman's raw, red hands hauling water stayed with him. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was as harsh and demanding as the land itself. Tala was introduced to the life of a rancher, which was a life of endless, repetitive labor. She knew how to skin a deer, how to tan hides, how to find water in a dry wash. But the rituals of the white man's agriculture were strange to her. Caleb showed her how to muck out the stalls in the barn. It was heavy, dirty work, lifting forkfuls of manure-soaked straw and wheeling them out to the pile behind the corral. The ammonia smell burned her nose, but she did not complain. She worked with a ferocity that surprised him, her small body generating power from some hidden reserve of will. He showed her the chicken coop, a wire-fenced enclosure on the south side of the barn. "Eggs," Caleb said, holding one up. "Gentle, don't break 'em." Tala nodded. She reached under a brooding hen, ignoring the bird's angry peck, and withdrew a warm, brown egg. She held it as if it were a gemstone, food, life. She placed it carefully in the basket. The hardest task was the washing. There was no fire for heating water in the middle of the day, so she stood by the cold water trough near the windmill, scrubbing Caleb's heavy canvas shirts and denim trousers against a washboard he had dug out of the shed. The water was numbing. The lye soap stung the cracks in her fingers. The wind whipped her hair across her face, drying her skin until it felt like parchment. As she scrubbed, Tala looked out at the world around her. To the north, the mountains rose up, their peaks capped with white snow that never seemed to melt. They looked beautiful and cruel, indifferent to the small struggles of the people below. The sky was an endless, aching blue, a vast dome that made her feel exposed. At night, the coyotes yipped and howled at the edges of the property, a chorus of laughter that reminded her that death was always waiting in the dark. She was tired. Her back ached, and her legs felt like lead. But every time she looked toward the house and saw Nika playing with a corn husk doll on the porch, or saw Tomas carrying wood, she found the strength to scrub another shirt. Caleb did not leave the boy idle. He saw the way Thomas watched him, with a mixture of fear and a desperate desire to be a man. "Come here, boy," Caleb said one morning in the barn. Thomas approached cautiously, keeping his eyes on Caleb's hands. "Grab that broom," Caleb ordered. He showed the boy how to sweep the center aisle, how to push the dust and hay chaff out the big double doors. Tomas attacked the floor with intensity, creating clouds of dust in his eagerness. "Easy," Caleb said, reaching out to steady the broom handle. "You ain't fighting a war with the dirt. Just move it, like this." He demonstrated the long, smooth strokes. Thomas mimicked him, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he looked up for approval, Caleb gave a short nod. "Good," Caleb said. The boy flushed with pride. Later, Caleb showed him how to coil a lariat rope so it wouldn't tangle, and how to carry 2 small buckets of grain without spilling them. Thomas followed the rancher like a shadow, trying to walk with the same hitch in his step, trying to spit into the dust the way Caleb did. He wanted to be useful. He wanted to prove that he was worth the food he ate. Nika was different. She was a creature of the house and the yard. She clung to Tala's skirt whenever she could, burying her face in the fabric if Caleb came too close. But when he was at a distance, she watched everything. She was fascinated by the chickens, clucking back at them, and she stared at the big ranch dog with wide, longing eyes. The dog, a mongrel named Buster, seemed to sense her harmlessness and would thump his tail in the dirt when she passed, though she never dared to touch him. In the evenings, after the sun had bled out of the sky and the cold clamped down, they gathered in the main room of the house. Caleb sat in his leather chair by the fire, mending harness or cleaning his rifle. Tala and the children sat near the stove on the floor. On the braided rug, they exchanged few words. The language barrier was a high wall. Tala knew enough English to trade and to beg, but not enough to explain the heaviness in her heart. Caleb had the words, but he had lost the habit of using them. "More wood," Caleb would say. Pointing to the box, Tala would nod and feed the stove. "Water," she would ask, lifting the pitcher. Caleb would nod. Their conversation was a dance of glances and practical gestures. A nod for yes, a sharp look for no, a hand held out for a tool, a finger pointing to a task. In the silence, the fire popped and hissed, and the wind rattled the window panes, trying to get in. The storm came 3 days later, in the middle of the afternoon. It did not start with rain. It started with a change in the light. The sun, which had been bright and hard, suddenly turned a sickly copper color. The wind died down for a heartbeat, creating a vacuum of silence that made the hair on Caleb's arms stand up. He was in the corral, checking the hoof of the roan mare. He dropped the hoof and looked west. A wall of brown was swallowing the world. It stretched from the ground to the sky, a rolling, churning mountain of dust that was moving faster than a horse could gallop. "Tala!" Caleb roared. She was by the chicken coop. She looked up, saw the wall, and froze. "Get the kids!" Caleb shouted, running toward them. "House! Now!" Tala scrambled, grabbing Nika from where she was digging in the dirt. Thomas was already running. Caleb reached them just as the first gusts hit, ripping the breath from their lungs. The air turned instantly gritty, stinging the eyes. "Go!" Caleb pushed them toward the porch. They tumbled inside, the wind slamming the door against Caleb's shoulder as he fought to close it. He dropped the heavy wooden bar into place and turned, leaning back against the door, breathing hard. The light in the room was extinguished. It was as dark as twilight, the air thick with fine, choking dust that seeped through the cracks in the walls and around the window frames. The sound was terrifying, a continuous, high-pitched shriek that sounded like 1,000 screaming women. The house shook, the timbers groaning under the assault. Caleb coughed, pulling his bandana up over his nose. He looked at Tala. She was huddled in the corner of the kitchen, clutching both children to her chest. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, staring at nothing. Her hands were trembling violently, her knuckles white where she gripped the children's clothes. "Tala," Caleb said. She did not answer. She was listening to the wind, but she was hearing something else. Caleb walked over to them. He knelt down, his bad knee cracking. The dust was a fog in the room, coating everything in a fine, gray layer. "It's just a storm," Caleb said, his voice loud over the roar outside. "It will pass." Tala flinched when he spoke. She looked at him, and for a moment, He saw sheer, unadulterated terror, not of the storm, but of the memory it brought. The wind, she whispered. Her voice was thin, fragile. Like this. The wind screamed like this. When? Caleb asked. Years, she said. The camp. We sleep. The wind scream. We think it is storm. She swallowed, her throat clicking dryly. But it was not storm. It was horses, many horses, and guns. Caleb went still. Soldiers come in the wind, Tala said, rocking slightly. They ride through the lodges. Fire. They throw fire. My husband, he run to get weapons. He fall. She made a motion with her hand, a chopping motion across her chest. He fall, she repeated. I take babies. I run. The smoke. It tastes like this. She looked at the dust swirling in the air of the kitchen. Caleb looked at her, and the guilt that he had been carrying for years suddenly felt heavy enough to crush him. He knew that tactic. Attack under the cover of a storm. Use the noise of the wind to mask the approach of the cavalry. Confusion, panic, fire. I was a scout, Caleb said. The words came out before he could stop them. He didn't want to say them. He wanted to bury them deep in the ground, like he had buried his family. Tala stopped rocking. She looked at him, her eyes sharpening. Scout? She asked. For army? Caleb nodded slowly. He looked down at his hands, blackened with ranch work and dust. I rode for them, he said, his voice rough. Arizona. Before I came here, I tracked for Crook, for the others. He did not say that he might have been there that night. He did not say that he might have been the one who found the trail that led to her camp. He didn't know for sure. There had been so many raids, so many camps. But the possibility hung in the air between them, sharp and deadly as a knife. Tala's body stiffened. She pulled the children tighter, leaning away from him. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a cold, sharp suspicion. You hunt us, she said. It was not a question. I did my job, Caleb said weakly. It was a war. War is soldiers fighting soldiers. Tala spat, her voice rising. You kill villages, you kill sleeping men, you kill babies. Caleb winced. He couldn't deny it. He had seen it. He had seen the aftermath, the bodies scattered like broken dolls. I left, Caleb said. I walked away. I couldn't do it no more. He looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed and full of a grief that mirrored her own. I buried my wife on that hill, Caleb said, pointing vaguely toward the back of the house. And my little girl, smallpox, not soldiers, but death is death. I know what it is to put a child in the ground. Tala stared at him. She saw the lines in his face, the gray in his hair, the way his hands shook slightly. She saw a man who was hollowed out by the same ghosts that haunted her. The wind howled outside, battering the house, demanding entry. Inside, the silence returned, heavier than before. The shared tragedy hung between them, a bridge made of pain. It didn't bring them together, but it made it impossible to look away. They sat there for an hour, maybe two, while the storm raged. Neither moved, neither spoke. They just breathed the dusty air and listened to the fury of the world. Two enemies trapped in a wooden box, bound by the dead they left behind. The storm passed, leaving the world scoured and brown. But something had shifted in the house. The fear was still there, but the secrecy was gone. Over the next few days, Tala worked with a new intensity. She seemed determined to prove that she was not just a victim, not just a refugee. She was strong. She saw Caleb saddling the roan mare to move a few stray cows back from the canyon edge. I ride, she said. Caleb looked at her. You ride? Apache ride before they walk, she said. He hesitated, then saddled the mule for himself and gave her the mare. She mounted in one fluid motion, grabbing a handful of mane and vaulting up. She rode without a saddle, her knees gripping the horse's flanks, her body moving in perfect synchronization with the animal. She rode better than him. She moved the cattle with sharp whistles and subtle shifts of her weight, cutting them from the brush with a precision that left Caleb watching in silent admiration. She wasn't just working, she was flowing. In the evenings, she mended clothes. She took Caleb's torn shirts and stitched them with fine, neat rows. She took scraps of fabric and patched the children's rags. She showed Tomas how to shake out the flour sack to get the last dusting of powder, and how to soak the beans longer so they used less wood to cook. She wasted nothing. She treated every crumb, every thread, as if it were gold. One evening, Caleb was struggling with a young gelding in the corral. The horse was skittish, rolling its eyes and tossing its head, refusing to take the bit. Caleb was getting frustrated, his voice rising, his movements jerky. "No," Tala said from the fence. She climbed through the rails. She did not walk toward the horse. She flowed toward it. She kept her eyes low, her body relaxed. She began to hum a low, rhythmic sound, deep in her throat. Caleb stepped back, watching. Tala approached the gelding's shoulder, not his head. She reached out a hand, palm flat. She murmured words in her own language, soft, rolling sounds that sounded like water over stones. The horse's ears flickered. He stopped tossing his head. He lowered his nose to sniff her hand. Tala stroked his neck, her touch firm but soothing. She ran her hand up to his ears, massaging the base. The horse let out a long breath and chewed his lip. "Spirit is scared," Tala said softly to Caleb. "Not breaking contact with the animal? You fight him. Do not fight. Ask." Caleb watched her, stunned. He had been fighting this land, these animals, his own memories for so long. He had forgotten how to ask. Dusk settled purple and soft over the ranch a week later. The wind had finally died down. Caleb stood by the corral fence, drinking coffee from a tin cup. Tala came out of the barn, wiping her hands on her apron. Caleb poured a splash of coffee into the cup's lid and held it out to her. "Here," he said. "It's hot." Tala stepped closer. She reached for the cup. Her fingers brushed his. It was a small thing, skin against skin, rough calluses against rough calluses. But the jolt that went through them was sharp and immediate. Heat, sudden and alarming. Shot up Caleb's arm. He looked at her. She looked at him. For a second, the barriers of race, of history, of the dead, vanished. There was just a man and a woman standing in the twilight, alive in a lonely world. Tala pulled her hand back as if burned. The coffee splashed onto the dirt. Her cheeks flushed a dark red. She looked confused, then ashamed. I go check children," she stammered. She turned and walked quickly toward the house, her head down. Caleb stood there, holding the empty lid. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He cursed softly and threw the rest of the coffee into the dust. That night, he didn't go inside. He sat on the porch, wrapped in his coat, staring at the vast canopy of stars that wheeled overhead. The Milky Way was a smear of diamond dust across the black. The loneliness, which he had worn like a comfortable old coat for years, suddenly felt tight. It felt like a prison. He listened. Through the thin walls of the house, he could hear murmuring. Then, a sound he hadn't heard in years. Laughter. It was faint, muffled, but it was there. Tala was telling the children a story. He could hear the cadence of her voice, rising and falling, and then the high, bright giggle of the little girl. Caleb closed his eyes. The sound hurt. It reminded him of what he had lost, but it also pulled at him. A warm gravity he couldn't resist. The cold snap broke records 2 nights later. The thermometer on the porch read 10 degrees below freezing. The wind was back, whistling through the eaves. Caleb woke to the smell of smoke. Not wood smoke, but the acrid smell of backdrafting soot. He jumped up and went into the kitchen. The stove was sputtering. A gust of wind down the chimney had blown soot into the room. He grabbed the poker, adjusting the flue, feeding in dry kindling to get the draw back. As the fire caught, the light flared up, illuminating the room. He stopped. Tala and the children were not in the bunk room. It must have been too freezing in there. They were huddled on the floor in front of the stove, wrapped together in the 2 thin blankets he had given them. They were a tangle of limbs. Tala was awake, sitting with her back against the wood box. Nika was asleep in her lap, and Thomas was curled against her side. Tala was rubbing Nika's bare feet between her hands, blowing on them to warm them. She looked up, startled by his entrance. "Too cold," she whispered. "Apologetic. Room is ice." Caleb looked at them. They were shivering. The blankets were threadbare. The stove flared again. A pop of sap sending sparks snapping against the glass front. Nika woke with a cry, flinching away from the noise. "Mama." Caleb knelt instinctively. "Easy," he said. "It's just the fire." He reached out. Nika looked at him, eyes wide with sleep and fear. But she was cold, and he was warm. He was wearing his heavy sheepskin coat. He opened the coat. "Here," he said gruffly. He didn't think she would do it, but the cold makes bold choices. Nika hesitated, looked at Tala, and then leaned forward. Caleb wrapped the edges of the big coat around her small, trembling body. She was so light, she felt like a bird. He could feel her shivering against his chest. He looked up and met Tala's eyes. She was watching his hands. She was watching the way he held her daughter, not with the grip of a captor, but with the careful, awkward gentleness of a father who had forgotten how to hold a child. Tala's expression softened. The hard mask of survival slipped, revealing something terrified and fragile underneath. A glimmer of trust. "You can't sleep on the floor," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. He stood up, lifting Nika with him. He carried her to the large braided rug closer to the stove's radiant heat. "Bring the mattress out here," Caleb said to Tala. "From the bunk room. Put it here, by the fire." Tala stood up. "But—" "Do it," Caleb said. "That room is an ice box. You'll freeze before morning." Tala woke Thomas, and together they dragged the thin mattress into the kitchen. They laid it out within the circle of the stove's warmth. Caleb went to his room and returned with a heavy buffalo hide robe, his own winter bedding. He threw it over the mattress. "Sleep," he said. Tala looked at the buffalo robe. It was thick, warm, luxurious compared to the rags they had. She looked at Caleb. He was standing there, awkward, looking everywhere but at her. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was different this time. It wasn't the transaction of payment. It was softer. Caleb nodded. "Keep the fire fed," he said. He turned to go back to his room. "Caleb." He stopped. He turned back. Tala was looking at him. Her dark eyes lingered on his face a heartbeat too long. There was a pull there, a magnetic tension that terrified him. He saw a woman, not an Apache, not a widow, but a woman who was seeing him. "Good night," she said softly. "Good night," Caleb mumbled. He retreated to his room and closed the door. He lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind. He felt the phantom warmth of the little girl against his chest. He felt the burn of Tala's gaze. He was in deep water. He knew it. He was drowning. The next morning, the supplies were low. The flour sack was limp, and the coffee tin was empty. Caleb saddled the bay horse. He packed his saddlebags. He checked his revolver, spinning the cylinder. Tala stood on the porch, the children flanking her. She watched him prepare. "I go to town," Caleb said. "Supplies." Tala nodded, her face impassive again. "Town means sheriff. Town means questions. Extra mouths," Caleb said, patting the saddlebag. "Need more flour." He swung into the saddle. He looked down at her. "Stay inside," he said. "If anyone comes, you hide. You know the place. I know," Tala said. Caleb gathered the reins. He looked at the horizon. He could just keep riding. He could ride to town, tell the sheriff, and be done with it. He could get his life back. His quiet, lonely, safe life. He looked back at the woman and the two children standing in the wind. They looked small and fragile against the vastness of the territory. "I'll be back by sundown," Caleb said. He turned the horse and rode out. Tala watched him go. She watched until he was just a speck in the distance, swallowed by the shimmer of heat and dust. She put her hand on Nika's shoulder. "Will he come back?" Thomas asked quietly. Tala looked at the empty trail. She thought of the coat around Nika's shoulders. She thought of the buffalo robe. She thought of the way his hands shook when he spoke of his dead wife. "I do not know," she said. But in her heart, she feared he would, and she feared what it would mean for all of them if he did. The town of Sonado sat baking in the center of the valley like a collection of bleached bones left to dry in the sun. It was not a place of comfort. It was a place of commerce and dust, a necessary evil for the scattered ranchers and prospectors who clung to the edges of the territory. The main street was a wide scar of dirt, rutted by wagon wheels and littered with horse manure that had dried into hard, fibrous pucks. Caleb Hart rode his bay gelding down the center of this street, his hat pulled low to shield his eyes from the glare. The town was quiet, suspended in the midday heat. A few horses dozed at the hitching rail in front of the saloon, their tails swishing lazily at flies. The white-clapboard church stood silent, its paint peeling in long, sun-blistered strips, and the flag atop the sheriff's office hung limp and lifeless against the pole. Caleb dismounted in front of the general store, tying the bay with a knot that was tight and efficient. He paused for a moment, patting the horse's neck, his eyes scanning the street. He felt exposed. For years, he had come to town as a ghost, a man who spoke to no one and bought only what was needed to keep himself alive. Today, he felt like a man carrying a lantern in the dark. Inside, the store smelled of pickle brine, sawdust, and dry leather. It was cooler than the street, but the air was still heavy. Silas, the storekeeper, a man with a belly that strained the buttons of his vest and a face shiny with sweat, looked up from the counter. "Afternoon, Caleb," Silas grunted, wiping his hands on a rag. "Ain't seen you in a month of Sundays." Caleb nodded, moving toward the back where the dry goods were stacked. Been busy? He began to gather what he needed. He worked quickly, piling the counter with sacks of flour, bags of pinto beans, a tin of coffee, and a cone of white sugar. He added a bolt of calico cloth and a small bag of peppermint sticks, hesitating only a second before placing them with the rest. Silas watched the pile grow, his eyebrows climbing toward his receding hairline. "That is a mite of flour for one man." "Caleb," Silas said, his voice taking on a wheedling, curious tone. "And sugar? You ain't never had a sweet tooth before." Caleb kept his face impassive. "Winter is coming," he said. "The almanac says it is going to be a hard one." "I hate riding in the snow." Silas chuckled, leaning his elbows on the counter. "Reckon that is true enough, but enough beans to feed a cavalry troop? You finally taking on help out there at the Twisted Oak?" Caleb felt a prickle of sweat start at the base of his spine and trickle down his back. He concentrated on counting out the coins from his leather pouch. "Just me, Silas. Just me and the cows." The bell above the door jingled, cutting off Silas's next question. Caleb did not turn, but he knew who it was by the heavy, deliberate tread of the boots on the floorboards. Sheriff Dane walked in, bringing the smell of tobacco and gun oil with him. He was a lean man, whittled down by the wind and violence of the frontier, until there was nothing left but gristle and bone. His eyes were the color of dirty ice, and they missed nothing. "Afternoon, Sheriff," Silas said. Straightening up, Dane nodded to the shopkeeper but kept his eyes on Caleb's back. "Hart," he said. Caleb turned slowly, keeping his hands visible on the counter. "Sheriff." Dane walked over, his spurs chinking softly. He looked at the pile of supplies, his gaze lingering on the bolt of calico cloth, a soft floral pattern that no bachelor rancher would ever have use for. "Stocking up?" Dane asked. "Winter," Caleb said, repeating the lie. It felt thinner this time. Dane reached out and touched the fabric with a rough finger. "Pretty," he said. "For curtains?" Caleb forced a shrug. "Maybe. The place is looking grim. Thought I might spruce it up." Dane stared at him for a long moment, the silence stretched, tight as a bowstring. Caleb willed his heart to slow down, willed his face to remain a mask of boredom. "You seen any strays out your way?" "Caleb?" Dane asked softly. "Cows?" Caleb asked. "People," Dane corrected. "We got word from the fort, some runaways from the reservation. A woman, 2 kids. Caleb shook his head. "No, I haven't seen a soul. Just the wind and the coyotes." Dane chewed on the inside of his cheek. "Is that a fact? Because folks say they saw smoke from your chimney every day this week. Usually you let the fire die during the day. I am getting old. Sheriff, Caleb said, meeting the lawman's gaze. My bones ache in the cold. I keep the fire up. Dane held the stare for another 10 seconds, searching for a crack, a twitch, a drop of sweat. Caleb held his ground, though his insides were churning with terror, not for himself, but for the 3 people waiting for him back at the ranch. All right, Dane said finally. Stepping back, you see anything? You ride in. Those Apaches are government property. Harboring them is a federal offense, not to mention what Burke and his boys would do if they found out. I know the law, Caleb said. Dane tipped his hat, a gesture devoid of respect, and walked out. Caleb finished paying Silas, his hands steady only through sheer force of will. He loaded the supplies onto the pack mule he had brought, tied the diamond hitch, and rode out of town without looking back. He could feel Dane's eyes burning a hole between his shoulder blades until he crested the first ridge. The ride back was long and quiet. But as the ranch came into view, Caleb felt the tension in his chest loosen slightly. The place looked peaceful. The windmill turned lazily in the breeze, and the cattle were grazing near the tank. But it was the activity in the yard that made him pull up his horse for a moment to watch. Tala was by the woodpile. She was swinging the heavy splitting axe with a rhythm and power that surprised him. She didn't chop like a white man. Using brute force, she used the weight of the axe head, snapping her wrists at the moment of impact to split the mesquite logs clean, near the barn. Tomas was struggling with the stirrup of Caleb's spare saddle. He was too short to reach the horse's back easily, but he had found an old crate to stand on. He was cinching the girth, checking it twice, his face a mask of serious concentration. And Nika was by the coop. She was walking slowly, clucking softly, followed by a line of hens. She stopped, pointed to a speckled hen, and whispered a name. She had named every one of them, turning livestock into friends. It was a domestic scene, a picture of a life Caleb had thought was buried in the grave on the hill. It was fragile, illegal, and beautiful. He rode down, and the moment the hooves hit the hard-packed yard, the scene shifted. Tala dropped the axe and spun around, hand going to her knife. Thomas grabbed a pitchfork. It was only when they recognized his silhouette that they relaxed. Caleb dismounted, and Thomas ran to take the horse's reins, proud to do the job. They did not see you? Tala asked, walking up to him, wiping sweat from her forehead. Caleb untied the pack. Sheriff asked questions. He knows something is different. He saw the cloth. He handed her the bolt of calico. Tala took it, her fingers brushing the soft cotton. She looked at him, her eyes wide. She had not had new cloth in years. For clothes, Caleb said gruffly. The kids look like scarecrows. Thank you, she whispered, before they could say more. A shout came from the ridge to the east. Hola! Tala froze. In a second, she had grabbed Nika and was motioning for Tomas to run to the barn. Wait, Caleb said, shielding his eyes. It is Miguel, my neighbor. He is white? Tala asked. Poised to flee. Mexican, Caleb said. He is a good man, but get inside. Stay away from the windows. Tala ushered the children into the house, the door clicking shut just as the rider approached. Miguel rode a sturdy mule, his sombrero battered and dusty. He was a man of 50 with a face like tanned leather and a smile that showed gold teeth. Buenas tardes. Caleb, Miguel called out. Reining in. Afternoon. Miguel, Caleb said, walking to the gate to meet him, blocking the view of the house. What brings you this far north? Wolves, Miguel said, his smile fading. Rosa saw a pack near the canyon. Big ones. They took a calf last night. Thought I would warn you. I appreciate it, Caleb said. I will keep a close watch. Miguel nodded, but his eyes drifted past Caleb. He looked at the woodpile, where the axe was still stuck in a log, surrounded by fresh splits. He looked at the washing line, where a small, tattered shirt that belonged to Nika was flapping in the wind. You are working hard, amigo, Miguel said slowly. Caleb shifted his weight. Just keeping busy. Miguel looked at the house. He saw the curtain twitch in the kitchen window. He looked back at Caleb, and his expression softened, but it was edged with worry. It is a lonely life out here. Caleb, Miguel said quietly. A man does what he must to not let the silence eat him. But be careful. The wind carries secrets, and some men in this valley have ears like coyotes. I hear you. Miguel, Caleb said. Miguel tipped his hat. Give my regards to the ranch. He turned his mule and rode off. He hadn't asked, but he knew. Caleb went inside. Tala was standing by the window, peeking through the crack in the shutters. He saw? She asked. He saw enough. Caleb said, he won't talk. But others might. You have to be careful. Tala, no more washing on the line when I am not here. If you hear a horse, you hide. This isn't a game. I know it is not a game. Tala snapped, her fear turning to anger. I play this game for 3 years. I know how to hide. 2 days later, the Danger wore a blue uniform. A patrol of 4 soldiers, led by a young lieutenant with a clean-shaven face and a stiff posture, rode up to the ranch gate. The dust rising behind them was visible for miles, giving Caleb time to shove Tala and the children into the narrow space behind the stacked firewood on the back porch. Lieutenant Evans, the officer introduced himself. Leaning down from his horse, he looked tired and dusty. We are patrolling from Fort Stanton, checking the outlying ranches. Caleb leaned on the gate post, his rifle resting easily in the crook of his arm. Quiet out here. Lieutenant. Evans took a drink from his canteen. We are looking for runaways. San Carlos Reservation reported a woman and 2 children missing, believed to be heading south. Caleb shook his head. Haven't seen them. Evans sighed, wiping his mouth. I didn't think so. Poor devils are probably dead in the desert by now, though I can't blame them for running. Caleb's ears perked up. Why is that? Evans glanced at his men, then lowered his voice. It is a mess down there. Rations aren't arriving. Someone is skimming the supplies before they even get to the agency. The Indians are starving. If I had kids and no food, I would run too. Caleb felt a cold knot in his stomach. Is the Army doing anything about it? Evans shrugged. We are soldiers, Mr. Hart. We follow orders. The Indian agents run the reservation. If they say the supplies are lost, they are lost. The patrol rode on after watering their horses. Caleb waited until they were a mile away before he went to the woodpile. Tala and the children crawled out. They were covered in bark dust and spider webs. Tala had her hand clamped over Nika's mouth. You heard? Caleb asked. Tala nodded. Her face was hard, her eyes blazing with a mixture of vindication and fury. He speaks truth, she said bitterly. The barrels come to the agency. They are full. Then at night, wagons come. They take the barrels to town, to the store, to the miners. In the morning, the agent tells us the barrels were empty. He gives us moldy flour. We eat it and get sick. She looked at her children. My husband went to speak to the agent. He said we are hungry. The soldiers beat him. They said he was trying to incite a riot. That is when we knew we had to leave. Caleb looked at the ground. He remembered his time as a scout. He remembered looking the other way when officers traded government beef for whiskey. He remembered the feeling of knowing it was wrong and doing nothing because he wanted to keep his stripes. I am sorry, Caleb said. Sorry does not fill bellies. Tala said, the rumors, like the wind, found their way to the ears of Silas Burke. Burke was a man who owned half the valley and wanted the other half. He had made his money supplying beef to the army during the wars, and he had made his reputation killing the people who originally lived on the land. He was a big man, his face scarred from a knife fight in his youth, his mouth a cruel slash amidst a gray beard. He rode onto Caleb's land 3 days after the soldiers. He didn't come alone. He brought 2 of his hands, men who looked like they would shoot their own mothers for $1. Caleb was in the barn when he heard the horses. He grabbed his shotgun and stepped out. Burke sat on a massive black stallion, looking down at Caleb with a sneer. Hart, Burke rumbled. Burke, Caleb replied. You are off your range, just checking for strays. Burke said, heard you might have some unusual livestock over here. Caleb held the shotgun across his chest. My cows are branded. I ain't talking about cows, Burke said. His eyes roamed the yard. He looked at the house. He saw the small footprints in the dust near the porch, footprints too small for a man. He saw a small, wooden doll that Nika had dropped near the water trough. Burke laughed. A harsh, barking sound. You playing daddy, Caleb? Or do you just like having a squaw to warm your bed? Caleb stepped forward, the hammer of the shotgun clicking back. Get off my land. Burke. Burke's smile vanished. Careful. Hart, you are harboring hostiles. That makes you a traitor. And you know what the law says about Indians off the reservation. They are fair game, like wolves. He spit a stream of tobacco juice onto Caleb's boot. I find them. I kill them, Burke said. And maybe I burn this shack down around your ears for good measure. He wheeled his horse and galloped off, his men following, whooping and hollering as they trampled Caleb's garden patch. Caleb stood there, shaking with rage. He went to the root cellar door and threw it open. Tala climbed out into the light, blinking. She held Nika in one arm and a knife in the other. Thomas followed, clutching a heavy stone. He knows, Caleb said, his voice tight. Tala brushed the dirt from her skirt. He is a bad man. I saw his eyes. He has the eyes of a snake. He will come back, Caleb said. And he will bring the sheriff next time, or more men. He paced the yard, his agitation growing. You can't stay hidden. It is impossible. We need to fix this. Fix? Tala asked. Papers, Caleb said. Stopping. I can hire you, make you an employee, a housekeeper. If we have a contract, signed by a judge, maybe Dane will back off. Tala stared at him. You want to buy me? No, Caleb said, frustrated. Not buy, hire. It is legal. It gives you a reason to be here. It gives me a master, Tala said, her voice rising. I ran from the reservation to be free. Now you want me to sign a paper that says I belong to you? It protects you. Caleb shouted. It protects you, Tala shouted back. You are ashamed. You want to show the town that the Indian woman is just a servant, just a broom that talks. That ain't it, Caleb roared. I am risking my life for you. I am risking this ranch. Then let us go, Tala screamed. If we are a burden, we go. She grabbed Nika's hand and started toward the gate. Caleb lunged and grabbed her arm. You go out there and you die. Burke is waiting. Tala spun on him, shoving him back with surprising strength. You white men, she hissed, tears standing in her eyes. You think you own the world. You think you own the land, the water, and the people. You think saving me gives you the right to rule me. Caleb stared at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the pride that centuries of war hadn't been able to extinguish. He saw her fear, masked as anger, and he realized his own anger was the same. He wasn't mad at her. He was terrified of losing her. He was terrified of the silence coming back. He let go of her arm. I don't want to own you, Caleb said softly. I don't want you to die. Tala looked at him, her chest heaving. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the things they couldn't say. I stay, she whispered finally. But no papers. I am not a servant. No papers. Caleb agreed. The violence didn't wait for the law. It came with the dark. 2 nights later, the wind picked up again. Caleb was asleep when the smell of smoke woke him. This time, it was unmistakable. Pine and dry grass. He scrambled out of bed. Grabbing his trousers, fire, he screamed. He ran out the back door. The small storage shed near the corral, where he kept the winter hay and tools, was an inferno. The flames were licking 20 feet into the black sky, roaring like a living beast. Caleb grabbed a bucket from the trough and ran toward the flames. The heat was blistering. Tala was there a second later. She didn't ask questions. She grabbed another bucket. They formed a desperate 2-person line, running to the tank, filling buckets, and throwing water on the side of the barn to keep the fire from jumping the gap. The wind whipped the sparks around them like a swarm of angry hornets. Caleb's eyes watered from the smoke. He could see Tala through the haze, her hair loose and flying, her face streaked with soot, fighting with everything she had. A gust of wind blew a shower of embers directly at her. A spark landed in her heavy black hair and flared. Tala! Caleb dropped his bucket and lunged. He didn't think. He grabbed her hair with his bare hand and crushed the spark. the smell of burnt hair and searing flesh filling his nose. He slapped the fire out, his palm screaming with pain. He grabbed her shoulders, spinning her around. "Are you hurt?" Tala stared up at him, her eyes wide and white in her blackened face. She was panting, her chest rising and falling against his. "No," she gasped. "Your hand." Caleb ignored the pain. He looked at her mouth. She looked at his. The fire roared beside them, the heat intense. But the heat between them was suddenly hotter. Adrenaline coursed through Caleb's veins. He felt alive. He felt a fierce, overwhelming need to kiss her, to taste the life in her, to claim this moment of survival. He leaned in. Tala leaned in. Her lips parted. Then she jerked back. She pulled away from his grip, shaking her head. "No," she whispered. "No good comes from this. We mix worlds. We burn." She turned and ran back to the water tank. Caleb stood there for a second, his hand throbbing, his heart hammering, before he turned back to fight the fire. They saved the barn, but the shed burned to the ground. The morning sun revealed the charred skeleton of the shed and something else. Tomas found it. He called to Caleb, his voice trembling. On the barn door, carved deep into the wood with a knife, was a crude message. It was a single word, a racial slur for an Apache woman, and below it, a drawing of a noose. Caleb stared at it, his jaw working. He turned to Tala. "Get the children ready," he said. "We leave?" she asked, fear in her voice. "We go to the mission," Caleb said. "I need to talk to Father Anselm. He has influence. Maybe he can help. It was a risk. Taking her off the ranch exposed her. But staying here and waiting for Burke to burn the house down was suicide." They rode the wagon to the mission, a half-day's journey. The mission was an oasis of adobe and cool shadows, surrounded by ancient cottonwood trees. Father Anselm met them in the courtyard. He was an old man with a face like a dried apple and eyes that were tired but kind. "Caleb," the priest said, looking at Tala and the children, "I heard rumors. They need help." "Father," Caleb said, "Burke is hunting them. He burned my shed last night." Anselm sighed, clasping his hands. "This is dangerous ground. My son, the town is angry. Burke is stirring up a hornet's nest." A nun walked by, her habit rustling. She stopped, looking at Tala with a severe expression. "You should be on the reservation," the nun scolded. "You endanger this man's soul and his life." Tala lowered her head, shame burning her cheeks. "Hush, sister," Anselm said gently. Another nun, younger, with a round, soft face, stepped out of the bakery. She saw Nika staring at the fresh bread in her basket. Without a word, she stepped between the stern sister and the child. She pressed a warm loaf into Nika's hands and winked, her eyes swimming with tears. "Eat, little one," she whispered. "God does not check papers." Caleb turned back to the priest. "Can you speak to the sheriff? Can you tell him to call off Burke?" Anselm shook his head sadly. "Dane walks a fine line. If he protects an Apache, the town turns on him." "Caleb, you should send them back." Caleb stiffened. "Back to starve? Back to be robbed by the agents?" "It is the law," Anselm said. "And it is safe. Here there will be blood." "I won't do it," Caleb said, his voice echoing off the adobe walls. "I won't send children back to that hell. If that is God's law, then God is wrong." Father Anselm crossed himself. "Careful. Caleb?" Tala watched Caleb. She had never heard a white man speak against his own God and his own people for her sake. Her heart twisted in her chest. "We are leaving," Caleb said. The ride home was somber. The sky turned a bruised purple as storm clouds gathered again. Halfway back, Thomas's pony stepped in a gopher hole and came up lame. The boy was unhurt, but the pony couldn't carry weight. "Tie the pony to the wagon," Caleb said. "Thomas, you ride in the back with Nika." That left Tala. There was no room on the wagon seat with the supplies. "Climb up," Caleb said, patting the rump of his big bay horse. "Behind me." Tala hesitated, then placed her foot on his boot. Caleb reached down, gripping her forearm. He pulled her up. She settled behind him. She had to wrap her arms around his waist to stay on. She pressed her body against his back. She could feel the heat of him through his shirt. She could smell the sweat, the smoke from the fire, and the leather of his coat. Caleb stiffened as her arms went around him. He could feel the softness of her breasts against his back, the warmth of her thighs against his. The horse moved out. The rhythm of the gait forced them to move together. Tala rested her cheek against his shoulder blade. She could hear his heart beating. It was slow and steady, a heavy, thudding drum. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine that they were just a man and a woman riding home, that there was no Burke, no law, no history of blood between them. Caleb gripped the reins until his knuckles turned white. He ground his teeth, fighting the urge to turn around and pull her into his arms. He wanted her. God help him. He wanted her more than he had wanted anything since Mary died. But he knew that wanting her was a death sentence. They rode in silence, the tension between them thicker than the coming storm. They reached the ranch gate as the first drops of rain began to fall. Caleb stopped the horse. His breath hitched. "Oh, God," he whispered. Tala peered around his shoulder. Lying directly in front of the gate was a calf. It was one of the strays Tala had helped round up. Its throat had been slit from ear to ear, the blood staining the dust in a wide, dark pool. Pinned to the calf's side with a knife was a piece of paper. The rain was starting to blur the ink, but the message was clear enough. "Next time, it's the kid." Caleb felt Tala's arms tighten around him, her fingernails digging into his ribs. He looked at the dead animal, then at the dark, empty house. The war hadn't just come to them. It had kicked in the front door. The days that followed the discovery of the dead calf were strung tight as piano wire. The ranch, once defined by its solitude, now felt like a fortress under siege. The vast, open bowl of the sky, which Caleb had always found comforting, now felt like an unblinking eye watching for their mistakes. Caleb cleaned his Winchester rifle every evening, the smell of gun oil becoming a permanent scent in the kitchen, mixing with the aroma of coffee and wood smoke. He moved the heavy oak dresser in front of the back door at night and slept with the revolver on a crate beside his bed. He drilled the fear into the children not with shouts, but with a quiet, terrifying seriousness. "If you see dust, you run," Caleb told Tomas, gripping the boy's thin shoulder. "You don't look to see who it is. You don't wait for me. You take your sister and you get into the cellar, and you pull the rug over the door. Do you understand?" Thomas nodded, his eyes huge and dark. "I understand." Tala watched these preparations with a face carved from stone. She did not argue with the caution, but she refused to be a passive passenger in their defense. If this was a war, she would know the battlefield. She began to prowl the perimeter of the ranch. She walked the fence lines, not just to check the wire, but to memorize the land. She studied the way the shadows fell in the arroyos at noon and at dusk. She found the hollows behind the mesquite thickets where a body could curl up unseen. She traced escape routes in the dirt with a stick, crouching beside Tomas and Nika. "Look here," she said, pointing to a jagged line in the dust. "This is the dry wash behind the barn. If they come from the road, you go here. It leads to the rocks." She looked up at the windmill, creaking in the relentless wind. She looked at the green scar of the irrigation ditch Caleb had dug by hand years ago, a vein of life that carried water from the tank to a small patch of alfalfa and a vegetable garden. She saw the miles of fencing, the cedar posts set deep and true. For the first time, she looked at the ranch not just as a shelter, but as a testament to the man's will. He had taken this hard, biting land and forced it to yield. He had built something where there should be nothing. It was a stubbornness she understood. It was a stubbornness she respected. A week into the siege, the work of the ranch demanded attention regardless of the threat. The late calves, born out of season, needed branding and cutting before they grew too large to handle. It was a cool evening, the sun dipping toward the jagged horizon, painting the clouds in violent strokes of bruised purple and blood orange. Caleb built a fire near the corral, heating the irons until they glowed a dull, menacing cherry red. There was a rough rhythm to the work that pushed the fear aside for an hour. Caleb roped a calf, the horse holding the line taut while he wrestled the animal to the ground. "Thomas," Caleb barked, "hold the leg, like I showed you." The boy scrambled forward, his face set in a mask of determination. He grabbed the calf's hind leg, bracing his feet in the dirt, leaning back with all his small weight to keep the animal from kicking. Tala knelt at the calf's head, pressing her knee against its neck, soothing it with low murmurs even as she prepared it for the pain. She was strong, her hands capable and sure. Caleb pulled the iron from the fire. "Ready?" "Ready," Tala said. He pressed the iron to the flank. The smoke rose thick and acrid, smelling of burnt hair and singed hide. The calf bawled, a guttural sound of shock, but held firm. Nika, sitting on the top rail of the fence, clapped her hands at the shower of orange sparks that drifted up into the twilight, unaware of the violence, seeing only the fireflies of industry. "Loose!" Caleb ordered. They let go, and the calf scrambled up, shaking its head, trotting back to its mother. They worked until the last light faded, branding 6 calves. By the end, they were all covered in dust and sweat, smelling of smoke and animal musk. They sat on the bench outside the barn, passing a canteen of water between them. Caleb's hands were black with soot. Tala's face was streaked with dirt, but her eyes were bright. Thomas sat on an overturned bucket, rubbing his sore arms, looking at Caleb with a mixture of exhaustion and pride. He had done a man's work. He had held the line. "Good job, boy," Caleb said, his voice raspy from the smoke. "You got a grip like a badger?" Thomas beamed, a rare, brilliant smile breaking through his stoicism. They sat in silence for a long time as the stars began to puncture the darkness. The Milky Way unfurled like a spilled sack of flour across the heavens. The air cooled rapidly, the heat of the branding fire dying down to embers. For a moment, with the physical ache in their muscles and the vast silence around them, the threats of Burke and the sheriff felt very far away. It felt like a normal life. Tala looked up at the sky. "The stars are cold tonight," she said softly. "They are." Caleb agreed. He took a sip from the canteen and handed it to her. The quiet stretched, but it wasn't the guarded silence of before. It was the silence of 2 people who had sweated together. It loosened the tongue. "My husband loved the stars," Tala said. She didn't look at Caleb. She looked at the 7 sisters rising in the east. He told the children stories about them. He said they were the campfires of our ancestors. Caleb watched her profile in the dim light. "What happened to him?" he asked. He had never asked directly. He had been afraid of the answer. Tala took a breath. It was a shaky sound. "It was 3 winters ago," she said. "We were camped in the Dragoon Mountains. We thought we were safe." The agent at the reservation, he had cut the beef rations again. "We were hungry. So we went to hunt." She paused, her hands tightening around the canteen. The wind was blowing hard that night. Like the storm last week. We did not hear the horses. The soldiers, they came from the dark. They did not ask for surrender. They just started shooting. She turned her head slightly, looking at the dark outline of the barn. My husband ran for his rifle. He was yelling at me to take the children. A bullet hit him in the neck. He fell by the fire. I saw the life go out of him. He looked at me, and then he was gone. Caleb felt a cold stone settle in his gut. He knew the Dragoon campaign. He knew the dates. "I grabbed Nika," Tala continued, her voice devoid of emotion, which made it worse. "Thomas ran with me. We ran into the rocks. We ran for miles in the dark. I could hear the screaming behind us. I could smell the lodges burning. We hid in a ravine for 2 days. No water, just rocks." She looked at Caleb then. Her eyes were dry, but they held a pain so ancient and deep it looked like the geology of the earth itself. "That is why I steal," she said. "That is why I run. Because the white men, they do not want us to live. They want us to be dust." Caleb looked down at his boots. The shame rose up in him, hot and suffocating. He could feel the ghost of his own past standing behind him, wearing a blue coat. "I know the Dragoons," Caleb said, His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. Tala went still. "I was there," Caleb said. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. He looked at the dying embers of the branding fire. "Not that night. Maybe, I don't know. But I was there that winter. I was scouting for Captain Murray." He swallowed, the taste of bile in his throat. "My job was to find the camps," he said, "to track the movement. I found the trails. I told the officers where the water was. I told them where the people were sleeping." He risked a glance at her. Tala was staring at him. Her face had drained of color. The camaraderie of the branding, the shared water, the quiet evening. It all shattered like glass dropped on a stone floor. "You?" she whispered. The word was a breath of horror. "I thought I was doing my duty," Caleb said, the words sounding hollow and pathetic even to his own ears. "I thought I was protecting settlers, but after a while, I saw what it was. It wasn't a war, it was a slaughter. You led them." Tala said. Her voice rose, trembling. "You showed them the way." "I didn't pull the trigger," Caleb said. "You showed them the way," Tala cried. She stood up abruptly, the canteen clattering to the ground. "You are the eyes of the snake." She backed away from him, her hands raised as if to ward off a blow. Her eyes blazed with a mixture of betrayal and revulsion. She looked at him and saw the men who had killed her husband. She saw the man who had helped burn her world. "Tala, listen," Caleb started, standing up. "Do not speak," she hissed. "You give us food. You give us shelter. And all the time, you have the blood of my people on your hands. You sleep in your bed while my husband rots in the ground because of men like you." "I can't change it," Caleb said, his shoulders slumping. "I can't undo it. Why do you think I live out here? Why do you think I live alone? Because I see their faces every time I close my eyes." Tala looked at him with profound disgust. "Your guilt is nothing," she said. "It is a small thing. It does not bring back the dead." She turned and ran toward the house, grabbing Tomas by the arm as he stood frozen near the porch. "Come," she ordered. She did not go into the house. She marched past the kitchen door and went straight to the barn. She would not sleep under the roof of a scout. She would not let her children breathe the same air. Caleb stood by the corral, watching them disappear into the darkness of the barn. He felt the old solitude rushing back in, colder and emptier than before. He sank back down onto the bench and put his head in his hands. The days that followed were a silent torture. Tala did the work. She milked the cow. She gathered the eggs, but she did not speak to him. She looked through him. When he entered a room, she left it. She moved her bedding and the children's blankets back to the loft of the barn, refusing his offers of the warm kitchen floor even as the frost deepened on the pumpkins in the garden. Tomas sensed the shift. He stopped following Caleb around. He stayed close to his mother, watching the rancher with renewed suspicion. The hero worship of the branding night turned to ash. Nika, confused by the sudden coldness, clung to Tala's skirts, her wide eyes darting between the two adults, sensing a danger she couldn't name. The rift made them vulnerable. It made them weak. It was 4 days later when the riders came. Caleb was 2 miles out, fixing a break in the drift fence where the cattle had pushed through. He was hammering a staple into a cedar post, his anger at himself driving the hammer blows. Back at the house, Tala was scrubbing clothes at the trough. Thomas was playing in the yard, throwing a stick for the dog. 2 men rode up to the gate. They were not Burke's men, and they were not soldiers. They wore dusty town clothes, bowlers instead of Stetsons. They looked like clerks or drifters trying to look respectable. Tala straightened up, wiping her soapy hands on her apron. She moved toward the porch, her hand going to the knife at her belt. The men stopped at the fence. One of them, a man with a thin mustache and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, leaned over his saddle horn. "Hey there, Sonny," he called to Thomas. Thomas stopped, holding the stick. He looked at Tala. "Come here, boy," the man said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a stick of red and white peppermint candy. "You ever had one of these? Pure sugar." Thomas stared at the candy. He had never tasted peppermint. He took a hesitant step forward. "Thomas, no!" Tala shouted. She ran from the trough, placing herself between the boy and the riders. She glared up at them. "What do you want?" The man with the mustache smiled, but it was a cold, predatory thing. "Just being friendly. Lady, we are from the agency. We heard there was a bright young boy out here. We got a school at the fort. Teach him to read. Teach him to be a civilized Christian." "We do not want school," Tala said, pushing Thomas behind her back. "Go away. Now, now," the second man said. He was heavier, with a face scarred by smallpox. "It ain't really a choice. The law says Indian children gotta be educated. We're just here to give him a ride. He will get 3 meals a day. Candy, too." He nudged his horse closer to the gate. "Come on, boy. Don't you want to ride a big horse?" It was a lie. Tala knew the schools. They were prisons where they cut the boys' hair, beat them for speaking their language, and worked them like mules. "He does not go!" Tala screamed. She pulled the knife. The men laughed. "Look at that," the mustache man said. "She is a wild one. Maybe we ought to take her in too. Sheriff would pay for a dangerous stray." The heavy man uncoiled a rope from his saddle. "Grab the kid," he said to his partner. "I will handle the squaw." Tala braced herself, crouching low. She would kill the first one who touched her son. Suddenly, a gunshot cracked the air. A divot of dirt exploded inches from the heavy man's horse. The horse reared, whinnying in panic. "Get back!" Caleb roared. He was galloping toward them on the bay, the reins in his teeth, his rifle shouldered. He looked like a demon, his face twisted in fury. He pulled the horse up hard, sliding to a stop in a cloud of dust, leveling the rifle at the men. "You got 3 seconds to turn those horses," Caleb snarled, "or I bury you where you sit." The men struggled to control their mounts. "Now look here, Hart," the mustache man stammered. "We are just doing civic work. These savages are..." "1," Caleb counted, thumbing the hammer. "You are making a mistake." "Hart," the heavy man yelled. "We will report this. Kidnapping, obstruction of justice." 2. The men saw the look in Caleb's eyes. It was the 1,000-yard stare of a man who had stopped caring about consequences. They wheeled their horses and spurred them, galloping away toward the road, shouting curses over their shoulders. Caleb watched them go until they were out of range. He lowered the rifle, his chest heaving. He looked down at Tala. She was trembling, clutching Thomas so hard her knuckles were white. She looked up at him. She didn't say thank you, but she didn't look away. Night fell heavy and suffocating. The wind had died, leaving a silence that rang in the ears. Tala sat on the ground near the barn door, her arms wrapped around her knees. She was watching the dark horizon, waiting for the men to come back, waiting for Burke, waiting for the end of the world. She heard Caleb's boots in the dirt. She didn't move. He stopped a few feet away. He didn't have his gun. He held his hat in his hands, turning the brim round and round. "I am sorry," he said. Tala stared at the dirt. "For the men today? For everything," Caleb said. "For the past, for not telling you, for being who I am." Tala looked up. Her face was a mask of pain. "You lied. I didn't lie," Caleb said softly. I didn't want to see that look in your eyes. The look you gave me the other night. I wanted to be the man who helped you, not the man who hunted you. You cannot be both." Tala said. "I know," Caleb said. He dropped to his knees in the dirt. He was close to her now. "I can't change what I did. Tala, I carry those ghosts every day. I see the faces of the women. I hear the crying. That is why I am here. That is why I don't go to town. I am trying to pay a debt that can't be paid." Tala looked at him. She saw the tears standing in his eyes. She saw the raw, open wound of his soul. She stood up, the anger inside her, hot and molten, finally boiled over. "You think your tears help?" she cried. She shoved him, hard. Caleb rocked back but didn't defend himself. "You think being sad fixes it?" Tala screamed. She hit him in the chest with her fist. "You killed us! You burned us!" She hit him again and again, her small fists hammering against his ribs. You took our land. You took our food. You took my husband. Caleb took the blows. He stood up and let her hit him. He deserved it. He deserved every ounce of her rage. I know. He choked out. I know. Tala's strikes began to lose their force. Her screams turned into ragged sobs. She was hitting him, but she was also holding onto his shirt, gripping the fabric as if it were the only solid thing in the world. I hate you, she sobbed, her head falling against his chest. I hate you. I know, Caleb whispered. He raised his hands slowly, hesitantly. He touched her wrists. He didn't push her away. He steadied her. Tala looked up. Her face was wet with tears, distorted by grief. She looked into his eyes and saw her own pain reflected there. They were two broken people standing in the wreckage of a war they hadn't started but had to finish. The distance between them collapsed. It wasn't a decision. It was a collision. Caleb's hands moved to her face, cupping her jaw. Tala's hands gripped his coat. The kiss was not gentle. It was desperate. It tasted of salt and dust and old grief. It was an eruption of everything they had been holding back. The fear, the loneliness, the need to feel something other than cold. They clung to each other under the indifferent stars. Caleb pulled her crushed against him, burying his face in her hair. Tala wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him down, needing to feel the weight of him, the heat of him, the proof that they were still alive. For a minute, or an hour, the world stopped. There was no White or Apache. There was just the desperate, aching friction of two bodies trying to keep the dark at bay. Then, slowly, the reality of the night seeped back in. Tala pulled back. She was breathing hard, her lips swollen, her eyes wide with a new kind of terror. She stepped back, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. No, she whispered. Caleb reached for her. Tala, no, she said, retreating toward the barn door. We cannot. The world will crush us. She looked at him one last time, a look of longing and despair, and then slipped inside the barn, sliding the heavy door shut. Caleb stood alone in the dark, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He touched his lips. He felt shattered, and he felt, for the first time in years, completely awake. The end of the truce came 2 days later. The water hole in the north pasture, the one furthest from the house, had been low. Caleb rode out early, before dawn, to check the level and see if he needed to move the herd. He was distracted. His mind was on the woman in his barn, on the taste of her mouth, on the impossible knot they were tied in. He didn't see the tracks until it was too late. The ambush was simple and brutal. A rope snapped tight across the trail, hidden in the dust. Caleb's horse tripped, pitching him forward. He hit the ground hard. The wind knocked out of him. Before he could reach for his revolver, a boot slammed into his ribs. He heard the crack of bone. He gasped, rolling over, trying to fight. There were 3 of them. Burke's men. He recognized the one with the scar from the other day. Teach you to love savages. The man grunted. They didn't shoot him. That would be too noisy, too quick. They used boots and rifle butts. They beat him with a methodical, silent efficiency. They broke his ribs. They split the skin over his eye. They kicked him until the world turned gray and spinning. Leave him for the buzzards. One of them said, They took his horse. They took his gun. They rode off, leaving him lying in the bottom of a dry ravine, the sun climbing high and hot into the sky. At the ranch, the sun passed its zenith. Tala was working in the garden, but her eyes kept flicking to the ridge. Caleb had said he would be back by noon. It was now mid-afternoon. The shadows lengthened. The silence of the ranch grew heavy. Something is wrong, she said to Thomas. She didn't wait. She couldn't wait. She ran to the corral. She saddled the roan mare. She moved with a frantic haste, her hands trembling as she tightened the cinch. Get Nika, she told Thomas. We take her to Miguel. They rode double on the mare, dropping Nika off with Rosa at the Mexican neighbor's homestead 3 miles away. Rosa, seeing Tala's face, didn't ask questions. She just took the child and crossed herself. Find him, Rosa said. Tala and Thomas rode north. Tala tracked like a wolf. She read the story in the dirt. She saw where Caleb's horse had passed. She saw where other horses had cut his trail. Her heart was a drum of ice in her chest. Not again. She prayed to spirits she hadn't spoken to in years. Do not let them take him too. They found the ravine at sunset. The buzzards were already circling, black commas against the darkening sky. Tala slid off the horse before it stopped moving. She scrambled down the rocky slope, sliding on the loose shale. Caleb! He was a heap of bloody clothes in the dirt. His face was swollen, unrecognizable. One eye was swollen shut. His shirt was torn, revealing the dark bruising of broken ribs. Tala fell to her knees beside him. She put her ear to his chest. A beat, faint, fluttery. But there, he is alive, she choked out. Tomas, help me! Caleb stirred at the sound of her voice. He groaned, a wet, rattling sound. He opened his good eye. It was hazy, unfocused. Tala, he rasped. Blood bubbled on his lips. Go. Hush, Tala said, her hands moving over him, checking for brakes. Trap, he whispered. They... waiting. Leave me. Save... kids. No, Tala said. Her voice was fierce. I do not leave you. She grabbed his arm. Thomas took the other. Up, she commanded. Caleb, you must help. Stand up. It was an agony. Caleb screamed as they hauled him up. His ribs grated together. He nearly passed out from the pain. But Tala was relentless. She shoved her small shoulder under his arm, taking his weight. She gritted her teeth, straining with every muscle in her body. They got him to the horse. It took 10 minutes to get him into the saddle. He slumped over the mare's neck, barely conscious. Tala swung up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist, holding him upright. Thomas walked ahead, leading the horse, his small face set in a grimace of determination. The ride back was a blur of pain and fear. When they reached the ranch, night had fallen. They got him into the house, into his bed. Tala cut his clothes off. She washed the blood from his face with warm water and a soft cloth. She bound his ribs with strips of fabric torn from her own petticoats, pulling them tight to hold the bone in place. She worked through the night. She didn't sleep. She sat in the chair beside the bed, holding his hand. Caleb drifted in and out of the fever dreams. He muttered about the war. He called out for Mary. He called out for Tala. I am here, she whispered in Apache, stroking his forehead. I am here. You are not allowed to die. Do you hear me? White man, you are not allowed to leave us. She squeezed his hand. Her anger at him was gone, burned away by the terror of losing him. She realized, sitting in the dark, that she had woven her life into his. She couldn't unravel it now without destroying herself. Dawn came gray and quiet. Caleb opened his eyes. The fever had broken. The pain was a dull roar, but his mind was clear. He felt a weight on his arm. He looked down. Tala was asleep, her head resting on the mattress, her cheek against his forearm. Her fingers were interlaced with his, gripping tight even in sleep. Caleb looked at her. He looked at the black hair spilling over his skin. He looked at the dark circles under her eyes. His heart ached with a tenderness so fierce it frightened him more than the beating. He realized he wasn't just guilty. He wasn't just lonely. He was in love with her. And he knew, with the clarity of a man who had looked death in the face, that he would burn the whole world down before he let anyone hurt her again. Tala stirred. She lifted her head, blinking. She saw him watching her. You are back, she whispered. I am back, Caleb rasped. Tala didn't smile. She just squeezed his hand, her eyes dark and resolute. We fight, she said softly. Caleb nodded, wincing. We fight. The recovery was a slow, grinding purgatory. For the first week, Caleb could barely rise from the mattress without the world tilting on its axis and gray spots dancing in his vision. His ribs were a cage of fire every time he drew a breath, and the bruising on his face turned from purple to a sickly yellow-green that made him look like a corpse that had decided to walk. He lay in the dim light of the bedroom, listening to the sounds of the ranch continuing without him. It was a torture of a different kind. He heard the rhythmic thwack of the axe biting into mesquite wood, knowing it was Tala's small arm swinging the heavy wedge. He heard the scrape of the shovel in the barn as Tomas moved the manure, a job that belonged to a man, not a boy who should be playing with a hoop in the dirt. Outside the window, the land seemed to mock his weakness. The wind was relentless, stripping the moisture from the soil, turning the dust into fine powder that sifted through the window frames. The sun hammered down on the tin roof, heating the house until the air felt thick and heavy. Caleb stared at the ceiling, counting the water stains on the plaster. He felt useless. A rancher who cannot ride is just another mouth to feed, and they had precious little food as it was. His pride, already battered by his past, stung with every groan of effort he heard from the yard. One afternoon, Tala came in to bring him a cup of broth. Her face was streaked with dirt, her hair escaping its braid in wild wisps. There was a smear of grease on her cheek, and her hands were wrapped in rags where the blisters from the axe handle had burst and bled. "Leave the wood," Caleb rasped, shifting painfully against the pillows. "It is enough for now." "We need fire for the night," Tala said, setting the cup on the bedside crate. "The nights are getting colder. Frost kills the garden if we do not cover it." "I should be doing it," Caleb said, his fist clenching the blanket. "You are broken," Tala said simply. She did not say it with pity, but with the flat pragmatism of her people. When a horse is lame, it does not run. You rest. We do the work. She turned to leave, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. "Tala," Caleb said. She stopped at the door. "Don't let Burke win." He said, "Don't let the place fall apart. That is what he wants. To see us fail without him firing another shot." Tala looked back at him. Her eyes were hard, flinty things. "He does not win," she said. "I have survived soldiers, hunger, and the desert. I can survive a pile of wood." As the days bled into weeks, Caleb's strength began to return in increments. He could sit up for longer stretches. He could walk to the kitchen table. The forced proximity brought a new kind of honesty between them. There was no energy left for masks. In the evenings, after the children were asleep in the bunk room, Tala would sit at the table mending clothes by the light of a single kerosene lamp. Caleb sat opposite her, nursing a cup of coffee, watching the needle flash in the yellow light. They talked. At first, it was just about the ranch, the water level in the tank, the hay supply, the coyote tracks near the coop. But slowly, the conversation drifted into the darker waters of their pasts. Tala spoke of the reservation at San Carlos. She described it not with the anger of the day she arrived, but with a weary precision. "The agent, Meeker," she said, biting a thread. "He had a book. He wrote down numbers. He said the government sent 100 barrels of flour, but in the storehouse, there were only 50. "Where did the rest go?" Caleb asked. "Town," Tala said. "At night, wagons came. We saw them. They took the flour to the general store in town. They took the blankets to the miners. Meeker wore a fine coat. My children wore rags." Caleb ran a hand over his face, feeling the scar tissue on his brow. "I knew it happened," he admitted. "I knew men got rich off the contracts. I never looked at the ledger." "It is not just theft," Tala said, looking up. "It is murder. When the winter came, the old ones died. No blankets, no meat. Meeker said it was a hard year, but he was fat." Caleb looked at the lamp flame. "I saw things too," he said quietly. "When I was scouting, I saw officers meeting with ranchers. I saw cattle herds that were supposed to be for the Apache being driven south to sell in Mexico." "Why did you not speak?" Tala asked. Caleb hesitated. The shame was a bitter taste in his mouth. "Because it was easier," he said. "Because I wanted to stay in the army. I wanted my pay. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself I was just a tracker." He looked at her, expecting the judgment he saw in his own reflection. "I was a coward. Tala," he said. "I let it happen." Tala put the needle down. She looked at him for a long time. The silence in the room was heavy, filled with the ghosts of the people who had starved because men like Caleb had stayed silent. "You cannot change the snow that has already fallen," she said finally. You cannot feed the dead. I know, Caleb said. But, Tala continued, leaning forward, if you want forgiveness, you cannot be silent now. You know Burke. You know the agents. You know how they steal. What can I do? Caleb asked. I am one man with a broken rib and a bad reputation. You can speak, Tala said. You can write. You know the words. Caleb looked at his hands. They were trembling slightly. To speak out was to paint a target on his back larger than the one Burke had already put there. It meant going to war not with guns, but with truth. And truth, in the territory, was often fatal. We write, Caleb said. The letter took 2 nights to compose. Caleb's hand was stiff, and his spelling was rusty, but he wrote with a grim determination. Tala paced the room, dictating the dates, the names, the amounts she remembered. She had a mind like a steel trap for the injustices done to her family. They addressed it to Lieutenant Evans. The young officer had seemed decent, perhaps naive, but decent. Caleb hinted at evidence. He named Burke. He named the agent Meeker. He described the night wagons and the starving winters. They paid Miguel to deliver it to the fort, disguised as a grocery list wrapped in brown paper. 4 days later, under the cover of a moonless night, Lieutenant Evans arrived. He rode alone, wearing a civilian coat over his uniform to avoid drawing attention. They sat in the kitchen. The wind moaned around the eaves, rattling the loose boards like a restless spirit. Caleb poured whiskey into 3 cups. Evans read the letter again, his face pale in the lamplight. These are serious accusations. Mr. Hart, Evans said, you are accusing the Indian agent and one of the most powerful cattlemen in the territory of conspiracy and fraud. It is the truth, Tala said. Her voice was steady, cutting through the young man's hesitation. I saw the wagons. I saw Burke's men shaking hands with Meeker. I saw the government stamp on the barrels in the town store. Evans looked at her. He looked at the Apache woman sitting at the white rancher's table, her chin lifted in defiance. He had been taught that these people were savages, incapable of honesty, but the look in her eyes was sharper than any regulation. I know there is irregularity, Evans admitted, running a hand through his hair. We suspect supplies are being diverted, but proving it? Burke has friends in Santa Fe. He has friends in Washington. I can testify, Caleb said. Evans looked at him. You. I was a scout. Caleb said, I know how the supply lines work, and I have seen Burke's operation. He buys government cattle cheap, cattle that are supposed to be condemned or lost, and sells them back to the army the next month. He is getting rich twice on the same cows. Evans was silent for a long moment. He took a drink of the whiskey. If you testify, he said quietly, Burke will come for you. Not just with lawsuits. He will come for you with everything he has. He has already come for me, Caleb said, touching his bruised ribs. He tried to kill me in a ravine last week. He burned my shed. He threatened the children. Evans's face hardened. He was young, but he was a soldier. He had a code, even if his superiors didn't. I can set up an inquiry. Evans said, the colonel is a hard man, but he hates thieves. If I bring this to him, he will have to convene a board. Do it, Caleb said. I will speak too, Tala said. Evans looked at her with concern. Miss, for an Apache to testify against a white man, it has never been done here. They will try to tear you apart. Let them try, Tala said. I have nothing left to lose but the truth. The shared mission changed the air in the house. The fear was still there, but it was no longer a paralyzing weight. It was a fuel. Tala and Caleb moved around each other with a new synchronization. They were soldiers in the same trench now. When Tala cooked, Caleb would silently step in to lift the heavy iron pot she struggled with. When Caleb's ribs ached so bad he couldn't bend, Tala would appear to tie his boots without a word. They handed each other tools, plates, and glances that carried whole conversations. Are you okay? Yes. Is the door locked? Yes, we are in this together. It was a cold night in late November when the wall finally broke. Snow was whispering across the ground outside, a dry, powder snow that hissed against the walls. The house was drafty. the cold seeping into the marrow of the wood. Caleb had gone to bed early, the ache in his side flaring up with the weather change. He was drifting in a haze of pain and fatigue when he heard the door creak. He opened his eyes. Tala stood there. She was holding a candle, the light casting a soft, golden glow on her face. She wore a heavy shawl over her nightdress. "I heard you groan," she whispered. "I am fine." Caleb lied, shifting. "You are not fine," Tala said. She set the candle on the crate. "Let me check the binding. If it is too tight, it hurts the breath." She sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under her weight. Caleb held his breath, not from pain, but from the sudden, overwhelming nearness of her. She pulled back the quilt. Her hands were cool, but her touch was gentle as she checked the strips of cloth wrapped around his chest. Her fingers brushed his bare skin, feather light. The silence in the room crackled. It was a physical thing, electric and heavy. Caleb looked at her face, concentrated and serious in the candlelight. He saw the curve of her eyelashes, the hollow of her throat, the pulse beating steadily under her jaw. She finished adjusting the cloth. "Good," she said. She made to stand up. Caleb's hand shot out. He caught her wrist. "Stay," he said. The word hung in the air. It was a plea. It was a confession. Tala froze. She looked down at his hand holding her wrist. She looked at his face. She saw the fear there, and the longing that mirrored her own. She knew what staying meant. It meant crossing a line from which there was no return. It meant scandal. It meant danger. But the cold outside was so vast, and the warmth in this room was so rare. She sat back down. Caleb released her wrist, but his hand stayed on the blanket near her thigh. "Tala," he whispered. "I don't want to be alone tonight." Tala looked at the candle flame. "I talk to my husband sometimes," she said softly. "In my head. I tell him I am sorry. I tell him I am trying to keep the children safe. I talk to Mary," Caleb admitted. "I ask her to forgive me for living when she died." Tala looked at him. Tears were swimming in her eyes, catching the light. "Do you think they would hate us?" she asked. "For finding warmth?" Caleb shook his head. "No, I think they would want us to survive, and you can't survive alone, not out here." He reached up. His hand was trembling. He cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "You are so strong," Caleb whispered. "You saved my life. You saved mine," Tala said, leaning into his palm. Her heart was pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She felt the heat of him radiating through the sheets. Caleb pulled her down gently. She went willingly, the fight draining out of her. She lay beside him on the narrow bed, on top of the covers at first. He turned on his side, ignoring the spike of pain in his ribs. He looked at her. They were inches apart. He could feel her breath on his face. "Tala," he breathed. He kissed her. It wasn't like the first kiss, the desperate collision in the yard. This was slow. It was a question. It was deep and shaking. Caleb tasted of coffee and pain. Tala tasted of salt and wood smoke. She made a small sound in her throat and buried her hands in his hair. The restraint they had built, the walls of race and history and propriety, crumbled under the sheer weight of their need. She pulled the quilt up over them, cocooning them against the cold, under the heavy wool. Their hands explored with a frantic tenderness. Caleb traced the line of her spine, the scars on her back from her escape through the rocks. Tala ran her hands over the ridges of his broken ribs, over the old bullet wounds, over the map of his violence. They didn't speak much. There were no flowery words. There was just the whisper of names in the dark. Caleb, Tala, they crossed the boundary from survivors to lovers. It was a desperate, hungry intimacy, driven by the knowledge that death was waiting outside the door. They clung to each other as if they could fuse their broken pieces into something whole. Afterward, the candle burned low and sputtered out. Tala lay with her head on Caleb's good shoulder, listening to the steady thump of his heart. She felt terrified. She knew the world would burn them for this if it found out. But she also felt fiercely, defiantly alive. She pressed a kiss to his chest. "I do not go back to the barn," she whispered in the dark. "No," Caleb said, his arm tightening around her. You stay right here." The next morning, the sun came up bright and hard on the snow. The light that filled the kitchen felt different. It was exposing. There was a tension in the house, but it wasn't the tension of conflict. It was the tension of a secret held between two people. When Caleb walked into the kitchen, leaning heavily on a cane, Tala was at the stove. She didn't turn around immediately. When she did, her cheeks flushed a dark red. "Coffee," she said, sliding a cup across the table. "Thank you," Caleb said. Their fingers brushed. They held the contact for a second too long. Caleb looked at her, his eyes soft, stripped of their usual guard. Tala offered a shy, fleeting smile that transformed her face, making her look 10 years younger. Thomas was sitting at the table, eating his porridge. He looked from his mother to Caleb. He saw the look. He saw the way Caleb moved to steady Tala when she slipped on a patch of meltwater near the door, his hand lingering on her waist. The boy stiffened at first, his spoon pausing halfway to his mouth. He was protective of his mother. He remembered the anger, but he also saw that his mother wasn't afraid. He saw that Caleb wasn't looking at her like a servant or a stranger. He was looking at her like she was the only fire in a cold world. Tomas went back to eating, but he pushed the sugar bowl toward Caleb without being asked. It was a small peace offering, a permission. 3 days later, the news arrived. A rider from the fort, not Evans, but a courier, brought a sealed packet. Caleb opened it at the table, his hands shaking slightly. "It is the inquiry," he said, looking up at Tala. "Next Tuesday, at the fort." "Who is called?" Tala asked. "Everyone," Caleb said, scanning the paper. "Me, you, the agent Meeker, and Burke." Tala went still. "Burke will be there." "He will," Caleb said. He put the paper down. "You don't have to go. Tala, I can go alone. I can tell them what you told me. It will be dangerous. Burke will try to intimidate you." Tala looked at Nika playing on the rug. She looked at the scar on Caleb's forehead. "If I hide, he wins," she said. "If I hide, I am just a ghost. I want to be a person." She stood up, smoothing her apron. I stand beside you." The ride to Fort Stanton was a grim procession. They took the wagon. Caleb drove, his rifle across his knees. Tala sat beside him, wearing the new calico dress she had sewn, her hair braided tight and neat. Thomas and Nika were left with Miguel and Rosa, hidden away. The fort was a sprawling collection of stone and timber buildings, bustling with soldiers, horses, and civilians. As Caleb drove the wagon through the main gate, heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through dry grass. "Look at that. Hart brought the squaw. Is that her, the thief?" Tala stared straight ahead, her spine rigid. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. The inquiry was held in the commissary hall, a long room smelling of sawdust and stale tobacco. A table was set up at the front for the board of officers. 3 men in dress blues, looking stern and bored. Burke was there. He sat in the front row, surrounded by his lawyers and a few other ranchers. He looked big and confident, his suit expensive, his boots polished. When Caleb and Tala walked in, Burke turned. He smiled, but it was the smile of a wolf looking at a trapped rabbit. The proceedings were dry and tedious at first, reviewing ledgers and manifests. Then they called Tala. She walked to the front. The room went silent. "State your name," the presiding colonel said. "Tala." She said. Her voice shook, then steadied. "Widow of Cochise's band." "Tell us about the rations," the colonel said. Tala spoke. She spoke of the hunger that clawed at the belly. She spoke of the children with swollen stomachs. She spoke of the barrels marked U.S. government that she saw in the back of the mercantile in town. "They beat my husband for asking," she said, her voice ringing in the silent hall. "They said the barrels were empty, but I saw the white flour on the storekeeper's boots." A murmur went through the room. Then Caleb was called. He stood next to Tala, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder before he stepped forward. "I saw the cattle," Caleb said. Burke's herd. "I saw the brands. U.S. brands. Burned over. He buys the sick cows for pennies, runs them on government grass, and sells them back as fresh beef." "Liar!" Burke shouted. "Standing up. Sit down. Mister Burke," the colonel barked. "He is a liar," Burke roared, his face turning red. "He is soft. He has been out in the sun too long. He is confused by a red woman's tricks. She has bewitched him." The room erupted in shouts. Caleb turned to Burke. He didn't shout. He spoke quietly, but his voice cut through the noise. "I ain't bewitched. Silas, I just woke up. You are a thief, and you are a killer." Burke looked like he was going to vault the railing and strangle Caleb, but the colonel banged his gavel. "That will be enough. The board will review the evidence. Lieutenant Evans will conduct a further audit of Mr. Burke's accounts." Burke sat down, seething. He looked at Caleb, and then at Tala. He drew a finger across his throat. They left the hall an hour later. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the parade ground. They walked to the wagon. The soldiers watched them pass. Some spat on the ground. Others looked away, ashamed. Outside the main gate, the trail narrowed between two rocky outcrops. Burke was waiting. He sat on his black horse, blocking the path. 2 of his men were with him. Caleb stopped the wagon. He reached for his rifle. "Don't bother. Hart," Burke said, holding up a hand. "Not here, not in front of the flag." He rode closer, leaning down. His eyes were cold. "Dead things. You think this is over?" Burke hissed. "You think a few papers and a weeping squaw are going to stop me? It is over. Burke," Caleb said, "the army is watching you now. Laws are slow." "Hart," Burke said, glancing at Tala. "Bullets are quick. You watch your back. And you watch that little girl of hers. Accidents happen." He spurred his horse and galloped off, dusting them. Caleb watched him go. He felt a cold chill settle in his bones that had nothing to do with the winter. He looked at Tala. She was pale, but she reached out and took his hand. "We started it," she said. "We did," Caleb said. He clicked his tongue at the horses. They rolled forward under the low, bruised sky, heading back to the ranch. They had struck a blow, but they had also kicked the hornet's nest. There was no going back to the quiet life now. There was only the storm ahead. The winter dragged on, not with snow, but with a tension that tightened around the ranch like a wet rawhide knot drying in the sun. The silence of the high desert, once a comfort to Caleb Hart, was now filled with phantom sounds. Every snap of a dry branch was a footstep. Every sudden gust of wind against the eaves was the prelude to an attack. Caleb slept in shifts, or barely slept at all. At dusk, he walked the perimeter of the homestead, his Winchester resting in the crook of his arm, his eyes scanning the ridges that turned purple and bruised in the fading light. He checked the wire, the gates, and the shadows, looking for the glint of metal or the silhouette of a rider. Inside the house, Tala slept with the lightness of a hunted doe. Her rifle, cleaned and oiled, leaned against the wall within arm's reach of the bed. She woke at the sound of the house settling, her hand going instantly to the cold steel barrel. They were living in a siege of silence, waiting for the blow they knew was coming. The valley was not kind to them. Small, petty acts of malice appeared like sores. One morning, Caleb found 3 dead coyotes hanging from his fence line, their carcasses stiff and swinging in the wind. A clear message that scavengers would be dealt with. Another day, Tomas found a scrap of weathered barnwood nailed to the gatepost. Scrawled on it in charcoal was a crude drawing of a grave and a message: "Send the squaw back or join her in hell." Caleb tore the wood down and burned it in the stove before Tala could see. But the smell of the charred wood hung in the kitchen, bitter and undeniable. Yet, in this desert of hostility, small flowers of humanity dared to bloom. Miguel and Rosa came by wagon one Sunday, pretending to check on a shared fence line. Under the cover of canvas tarps, they brought sacks of dried corn and a jar of Rosa's preserved peaches. "We do not like Burke's kind," Miguel said. spitting into the dust as he helped Caleb unload the sacks in the barn. He thinks he owns the sun and the rain. What you did at the fort. It took cojones, amigo. It took heart. Rosa held Tala's hands for a moment, pressing a small bundle of dried herbs into her palm. For the tea, she whispered, to keep the spirit strong. Even the church, which often stood as a fortress of its own judgment, sent a quiet emissary. A mission sister, the one who had given Nika bread, rode out on a donkey accompanied by an old mestizo laborer. She brought a length of blue wool cloth and a small wooden cross on a leather thong for Nika. I do not know if I approve of this arrangement. Mr. Hart, the sister said, her face pinched within her wimple as she looked at the unmade bed where Caleb and Tala slept. It is not the way of the church. But then she looked at Nika, who was wearing a dress clean and mended, her hair braided with ribbons Tala had saved. She looked at the way Tala stood beside Caleb, not cowering, but standing as his equal. But God sees the heart, the sister murmured, crossing herself. And I see love here, even if it is a dangerous kind. I will pray for your safety. The seasons shifted. The snow retreated to the highest peaks, leaving the valley floor a sea of mud that slowly dried into the familiar, choking dust of spring. The cottonwoods along the irrigation ditch put out tentative green leaves, a splash of hope against the brown. It was in this time of renewal that Tala realized the rhythm of her own body had changed. Her monthly bleeding had stopped. Her breasts felt tender, and the smell of frying bacon turned her stomach in the mornings. She went to the creek bed, sitting on a flat stone, and put her hands on her belly. She was carrying Caleb's child. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, a collision of joy and terror. A child, a new life, a testament to the love they had forged in the dark. But with the joy came the cold shadow of memory. She remembered the women in her band who had died in childbirth, their screams lost to the wind. She remembered Caleb's story of his first wife, bleeding to death on the mattress in the ranch house. And she thought of the world this child would enter, a world that called its mother a savage and its father a traitor. A child of mixed blood would belong to neither world, hunted by one and despised by the other. She waited until evening to tell him. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset bleed out across the sky. The children were asleep. "Caleb," she said. He turned to her, his face lined with the stress of the last few months, but his eyes soft when they landed on her. "Yeah." Tala took his hand. She placed it on her stomach. "There is life here," she said. Caleb went still. He looked at his hand, then at her face. The color drained from his skin, leaving him gray under his tan. He pulled his hand back as if he had touched a hot iron. "Pregnant?" he whispered. The word was a husk of sound. Tala nodded. "Yes." Caleb stood up abruptly. He walked to the edge of the porch, gripping the railing until the wood groaned. A vision swam before his eyes, a memory he had spent years trying to drink away. The smell of copper blood, the pale, waxy face of Mary, the tiny, silent bundle that was his son. "No!" Caleb choked out. He turned to her, panic wild in his eyes. "Tala, it is too dangerous. Out here, with no doctor, with Burke." He was terrified. The fear was a living thing in his chest, clawing at his heart. He could not survive it again. He could not put another woman in the ground. Tala stood up. She walked to him. She did not touch him, but she forced him to look at her. "Look at me, Caleb," she commanded. He looked. He saw fear in her eyes. Yes, but beneath the fear, he saw a bedrock of iron. He saw the woman who had walked across a desert to save her starving children. He saw the woman who had faced down a bear with a knife. "I am not Mary," Tala said gently but firmly. "I am Tala. I have birthed 2 children in the brush, on a blanket of leaves. I am strong." She took his hand again and placed it back on her belly. "This is not death. Caleb, this is us. This is the answer to the hate." Caleb looked at her determined face. He looked past her, through the open door, where Thomas and Nika were sleeping safely. He felt the warmth of her skin through her dress. Slowly, the ice around his heart began to crack. The terror did not vanish, but it was overwhelmed by a fierce, protective tidal wave. A baby, he whispered. Our baby, Tala said. Caleb pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. He held her as if she were made of glass, yet anchored her as if he were a mountain. The question of their future hung between them like smoke. Late at night, they argued, their voices low and urgent. We should leave, Caleb said one night, pacing the bedroom. Sell the herd, go to California, go somewhere where nobody knows us. And run forever? Tala asked from the bed. You think California is different? You think they will not see an Apache woman and a white man? The hate is everywhere. Caleb, we could marry. Caleb suggested another time. In the church. Father Anselm would do it. If we have papers. If it is legal, maybe the town will accept it. Tala laughed. A short, bitter sound. Papers? You think a paper shield stops a bullet? You think Burke cares about a priest's blessing? Then what do we do? Caleb asked. Frustrated. We stay, Tala said. We stand. We make this place ours, not by their laws, but by ours. So they made their own law. On a morning when the sky was a piercing, cloudless blue, they walked up the hill behind the house. They stood before the 2 wooden crosses that marked the graves of Caleb's wife and child. It was a solemn place, a place of grief, but they were there to turn it into a place of beginning. Caleb wore his best black coat. Tala wore a dress of deer hide she had tanned herself, soft as butter, embroidered with the blue beads the sister had brought. There were no witnesses but the wind and the hawks. Caleb took a strip of cloth from his old cavalry shirt. Tala took a strip of leather from the pouch her first husband had carried. They braided them together, white cotton and brown hide, twisting them into a single, unbreakable cord. Caleb held Tala's hands. Caleb Hart, take you, Tala, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Not as my property, not as my servant, but as my partner. I share my name with you. I share this land. I vow to stand between you and the dark. I vow to stop turning away. Tala looked at him, her dark eyes shining. Tala, take you, Caleb, she said. I share my strength. I share my stories. I vow that our children will know who they are. They will speak my tongue and yours. We walked together. They tied the braided cord around their joined wrists, binding themselves. They kissed in the shadow of the mountains, a seal upon a promise that was stronger than any paper signed in a courthouse. For a brief time, the ranch held its breath in a bubble of quiet happiness. The spring grass came in green and sweet. The cattle grew fat. Tomas, now taller and broader in the shoulders, spent his afternoons in the corral with Caleb. The sound of Caleb's patient instruction and Thomas's laughter drifted on the breeze. Elbow up. Tomas, Caleb would call. Swing the loop. Don't throw it. Let the rope do the work. When the loop finally settled true over the fence post, Tomas would whoop, and Caleb would tip his hat, a grin splitting his weathered face. Nika followed Tala like a shadow, mimicking her movements. As Tala mended shirts on the porch, Nika would push a dull needle through a scrap of cloth, humming the old songs Tala sang, songs about the mountain spirits and the origin of fire. The wind felt softer. The dread that had defined their winter seemed to recede, pushed back by the sheer force of their domestic peace. But peace, in the territory, was often just the eye of the storm. The storm broke on a Tuesday. Burke was desperate. The investigation led by Lieutenant Evans was tightening. Army auditors had been seen at the agency. A federal marshal was rumored to be on his way from Santa Fe. Burke knew his time was running out. He could not stop the law with bribes anymore. He had to stop the witnesses. It was mid-afternoon. The heat was beginning to build. Tala was hanging washing on the line when she saw it. Dust on the ridge. Not the thin trail of a single rider, but a cloud. She dropped the wet sheet. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. Caleb, she shouted. Her voice was a whip crack across the yard. Caleb was on the porch, oiling a harness. He looked up, saw the dust, and moved. Kids, cellar, now. It was a drill they had practiced 100 times. Thomas dropped the bucket he was carrying. He grabbed Nika's hand. They ran for the storm cellar door near the kitchen. Tala met them there. She grabbed Thomas by the face. "You go down," she said fiercely. "You lock the bolt from the inside. You do not open it. Not for voices, not for fire. Only when I say the secret word, you remember? Gawa," Thomas whispered. "Home, Gawa," Tala repeated. "Go." She shoved them down into the darkness and slammed the heavy oak doors. She heard the bolt slide home. Caleb was already tossing her the Winchester. He had his double-barreled shotgun. Upstairs, he ordered, "Watch the north, I take the porch." Tala ran up the stairs to the bedroom window. She threw the sash open and rested the rifle on the sill. Her heart was a hammer in her throat, but her hands were steady. Burke rode into the yard with 5 men. They were heavily armed, their faces covered with bandanas. But there was no mistaking Burke's bulk on his black stallion. They did not ride with the caution of soldiers. They rode with the arrogance of executioners. They fanned out around the yard, guns drawn. Caleb sat on the porch bench, the shotgun resting across his knees. He looked calm, but his eyes were deadly. "That is close enough." "Burke!" Caleb called out. Burke reined in his horse near the water trough. "Halt!" Burke shouted. "Send out the woman! Send out the brats! We know they are here! This is my land!" "Burke," Caleb replied, his voice steady, "and that is my family. You turn around now, or you don't ride out." Burke laughed. It was a manic, jagged sound. "Your family. You are a race trader. Hart, you are filth." Burke raised his heavy revolver. "Burn it," he screamed to his men. "Burn them out!" The air exploded. Tala didn't wait. She saw a man raising a torch toward the barn. She lined up the sights, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The man with the torch screamed, clutching his thigh, and fell from his saddle. The yard erupted into chaos. Bullets slammed into the siding of the house, shattering windows and sending splinters flying like shrapnel. Caleb rolled off the bench as the wood where he had been sitting disintegrated under a hail of lead. He fired the shotgun. Boom, boom, a roar that shook the porch. The spray of buckshot took down a horse, sending its rider tumbling into the dirt. Tala worked the lever of the Winchester. Clack, clack. She fired again. She wasn't shooting to scare. She was shooting to kill. She was a mother protecting her young, and there is no creature on earth more dangerous. A bullet punched through the bedroom wall, missing her head by inches, showering her hair with plaster dust. She didn't flinch. She acquired a new target. Below, Caleb was pinned down behind a rain barrel. He reloaded with fumbling, desperate hands. A bullet grazed his left arm, tearing through the sleeve and furrowing the flesh. Blood soaked his shirt instantly, hot and wet. He gritted his teeth against the sting and snapped the shotgun closed. "Burke!" Caleb roared, popping up to fire. But Burke wasn't in the saddle. Tala saw him from the window, while his men kept Caleb pinned. Burke had dismounted. He was creeping along the side of the house, keeping low. He was heading for the cellar doors. "No," Tala whispered. The horror clamped around her throat. He knew. He was going to kill the children to break them. She abandoned the window. She ran across the room, down the stairs, her moccasins thudding on the wood. She burst out the kitchen door just as Burke reached the cellar. He was yanking on the handle, shouting at the wood. "Open up, you little rats!" The bolt held, but he raised his pistol to shoot the lock. "Burke!" Tala screamed. Burke spun around. Time seemed to warp, stretching thin and slow. They faced each other across 10 yards of dusty ground. The man who had hunted her people for sport, the man who represented every hunger, every death, every injustice she had ever suffered, and the woman he had tried to erase. Burke's eyes widened. He saw the rifle in her hands. He saw the look on her face. Not fear, but judgment. He swung his pistol toward her. Tala didn't hesitate. She didn't tremble. She fired from the hip. The Winchester barked. The bullet struck Burke in the center of his chest. The impact lifted him off his feet. He flew backward, his pistol discharging harmlessly into the sky, and landed hard in the dust right at the threshold of the children's refuge. He gasped once, a pink froth bubbling on his lips. And then his eyes went fixed and glassy. The cruel mouth went slack. The shooting in the yard stopped. The sudden silence was louder than the gunfire. Burke's men saw their leader down. They saw the Apache woman standing over him, levering a fresh round into the chamber, her teeth bared in a snarl. They saw Caleb rising from behind the rain barrel, bloodied but holding the shotgun leveled at them. The fight went out of them. They were hired guns, bullies, not soldiers. Without Burke's money and rage driving them, they were just men facing death. They wheeled their horses and fled, spurring them toward the open range, leaving their wounded and their dead boss behind. Tala stood there, breathing in heaving gasps. The rifle barrel was hot in her hands. She looked at Burke's body. It looked small now, just a pile of meat and clothes. Tala! Caleb staggered around the corner of the house. He was clutching his bleeding arm. He saw Burke. He saw Tala. He dropped his gun and ran to her. He collided with her, wrapping his good arm around her, burying his face in her hair. They clung to each other, shaking violently as the adrenaline crashed out of their systems. "Are you hit?" Caleb gasped, checking her face, her arms. "No," Tala sobbed. "No, you? Just a scratch," Caleb said. "Just a scratch." He looked at the cellar door. He knelt down and knocked 3 times. "Gawa!" He choked out. The bolt slid back. The doors opened. Thomas and Nika peered out, blinking in the sunlight. They saw the body. They saw their mother and Caleb, covered in dust and blood, standing together. "Mama?" Nika whispered. Tala dropped to her knees and pulled them into her arms. Caleb knelt beside them, wrapping his big arms around the whole huddle. They were a single knot of humanity, a shield against the world. The aftermath was a blur of blue uniforms. Lieutenant Evans arrived the next day with a platoon of cavalry. They had been on their way to serve the warrant when they met the fleeing ranch hands. They found Burke's body where it had fallen. Evans stood over it, his face grim. "Self-defense," Caleb said, his arm in a sling. "He attacked my home. He tried to kill my children." Evans looked at the bullet hole. He looked at Tala. He nodded slowly. "Justice served. Mr. Hart." Evans said, "We will handle the paperwork." The inquiry that followed was short, with Burke dead and his men turning evidence to save their own necks. The conspiracy crumbled. The agents at the reservation were removed. Some went to prison. New supplies began to flow, real flour, fresh beef. It wasn't perfect, but fewer children would starve that winter. In town, the mood shifted. It wasn't a sudden embrace. Prejudice ran deep, like the roots of the mesquite. But the whispers changed. They stopped calling Caleb a traitor. Some called him a fool. Yes, but others called him a man who stood his ground. When Tala rode into town with Caleb a month later, sitting high on the wagon seat, heavy with child, people stared, but no one spat. The sheriff touched the brim of his hat as they passed. It was a small thing, a tiny crack in the wall of hate, but it was enough to let the light in. Summer turned to autumn. The cottonwoods turned gold. Tala's belly grew round and heavy. Caleb was a hovering shadow. His fear of the birth was a constant, low-level hum. He checked on her 100 times a day. He built a cradle with his own hands, sanding the wood until it was smooth as silk. The labor began on a night when the wind was howling down from the peaks, rattling the shutters. It was long. It was hard. Tala paced the floor, gripping the furniture, sweating through her dress. Caleb was beside her, his face pale, wiping her brow, holding her hand until his knuckles turned white. Every time she cried out, Caleb flinched as if he had been struck. The terror in his eyes was absolute. "I can't lose you," he whispered, panic rising in his voice as the hours stretched on. "Tala, please." Tala gripped his hand. She looked up at him through the haze of pain. "This is different. Caleb," she gasped, "I am not alone. We are doing this together." She drew strength from him, and he drew courage from her. Just before dawn, as the wind died down to a whisper, a cry cut through the room. It was a lusty, angry squall. Tala laughed and sobbed at the same time. The midwife, Rosa, who had come to help, cleaned the baby and placed him in Tala's arms. He was small. He had a tuft of black hair like his mother and the slate blue eyes of his father. He was a perfect, undeniable blending of their bloodlines. Caleb stared at the child. He reached out a trembling finger. The baby's tiny hand closed around it. Caleb let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Tears slipped silently down his weathered cheeks, washing away the last of the dust, the last of the guilt. The hole in his heart, the one that had been empty for so long, filled up with a light so bright it hurt. "He is here," Caleb whispered. "He is here," Tala said. Time, as it does in the West, moved on the back of the seasons. The ranch changed. It was no longer a place of silence. It was a place of noise, of children shouting, of dogs barking, of life. We see glimpses of their days. Tala walking the fence line with the baby strapped to her back in a cradleboard, teaching Thomas and Nika the Apache names for the plants and the birds. This is sage, this is hawk, this is how we live. We see Caleb at the kitchen table in the evenings, the oil lamp burning low, teaching the children to read from old ledgers and a Bible. A is for apple, B is for barn. Thomas tracing the letters with a dirty finger, his mind expanding beyond the horizon. We see the neighbors stopping by, Miguel and Rosa bringing a quilt for the baby, the mission sister drinking coffee on the porch, even Silas, the storekeeper, asking after the family when Caleb went to town. The prejudice did not vanish. There were still cold stares. There were still people who crossed the street to avoid them. But Caleb and Tala faced them side by side, heads high, refusing to hide the truth of who they were to each other. On a calm evening, years later, Caleb and Tala sat on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the western sky in streaks of red and gold. The land stretched out before them, harsh and wild and beautiful. In the yard, Thomas was showing Nika how to spin a rope. The baby, now a toddler, was chasing the chickens, shrieking with delight. Caleb leaned back in his chair, his shoulder pressing against Tala's. "You know," he said softly, watching the children, "I thought this place was just dirt and wind. I thought I would die here alone." Tala took his hand, interlacing their fingers. Her palm was rough, like his. "It was a grave," she said, "but we planted something in it." Caleb squeezed her hand. "A stubborn crop," he said, smiling. Tala rested her head on his shoulder, like grass between the stones. She said, they sat in the easy silence of people who have walked through fire and come out the other side. The world was still imperfect. It was still hard, but their love had rooted itself deep in the dry earth, binding them together against the wind, the dust, and the judgment of others. Tala and Caleb stepped down from the porch. They walked into the yard to join their children, their laughter rising into the vast, indifferent sky. Two broken lives woven together into a miracle strong enough to endure. Thank you for listening to this story of Tala and Caleb. I hope their journey through the harsh beauty of the American West resonated with you. It is a story about the boundaries we build and the courage it takes to cross them. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from? Please let me know in the comments. What are your thoughts on the story? Did the ending bring you the peace they fought so hard for? If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to From Wild West for more stories of love, survival, and the human spirit on the frontier. Share your thoughts in English. I read every one of them.